What's going on, people? On all the platforms tonight for the first time, literally ever. I hope you all realize, everybody, this is unfucking precedented for the Brady channel to be live on all the platforms at the same time. I'm sorry. Oh my god, wait, was there lag? Oh no. No, Bell, why would you do this to me? Guys, that's so embarrassing. I fucked up the freaking transition. That's horrible. It's okay. This is live streaming. This is what happens, people. When the internet connection that we pay $60 a month for doesn't work properly sometimes. I thought I got the good one, everyone. I pay 60 bucks a month and the stream still lagged. Anyways, everybody, I want to give a big welcome to everybody on all the platforms. YouTube, TikTok, and Twitch. Do you know how long it's been since I've been live on Twitch, everyone? I just want to shout out the fact that it's been a solid... Oh, Jesus, that was a fucking transition to the next song. All right. It's been a solid 7 months since I have last been live on Twitch. Happy to be back, though. I feel like this is a very, very special occasion. Shout out to everyone on YouTube. Shout out to everyone on Twitch. I don't know how many people are on Twitch right now because I do not have the live panel open. I have YouTube, and we got 10 people on YouTube. TikTok, I can't see how many people are watching, but it doesn't really matter. Tonight, everyone, we have a stream that I don't normally consider myself an expert in. The debate sphere, everybody, is not something that I often get involved in here on TikTok. But circa last night, I hopped off stream, and I saw my friend Cade Bradley was live on Instagram, and I'm like, oh, he's debating some people about issues that I tend to be a little bit passionate about. Gay marriage, and as a former Catholic myself, the intersection of that with Catholicism. So, after his stream ended, I figured, you know what? By the way, Cade Bradley and I, he is the creator of the Intrinsically Ordered podcast, who I was on just a few months ago. And I had a great time. I thought his message was great, guys. I never fucking apply, or rather, I never do collabs with fucking anyone, unless it's a message that I resonate with, you know? So anyways, we are now here. We've been meaning to collab for so long, everybody, and we finally put something together for all of you. So I present to all of you the Debate Club. Or rather, the last time that we've done an episode of the Debate Club was also 10 months ago. It was like Christmas of last year. And I've always wanted to bring it back, but this is not something I do that often. But anyways, folks, I think it's time to get into the debate. We are going to head over to Discord, where all of our debate participants are joining us from today. We have Ben Elliott. We have Logan Coe. If I said your name correctly, please feel free to sue me if I said it wrong. I apologize. I can't hear you, so you can scream at me later. It's okay. I apologize. We have Cade Bradley, and we have myself. So we are going to hand it over now to the Discord. Give me 1 second. We're going to hand it over in 3, 2, 1. If I've done everything right, y'all should be audible. Welcome, everyone. Please say hello to the stream.
What's poppin'?
What's going on, guys?
Very, very good. I got all of you nice and clear. Hold on, my face is in the way. Actually, no, it's perfect. So I guess we can go in order. Each of you can introduce yourselves to the chat. Say a little bit about yourself. Tell them your name, what you do on social media, a little bit about yourself that would be pertinent to the discussion we're going to have tonight. And we will go from there. You first, Ben, because you're at the top of my screen.
What's going on, everybody? My name's Ben Elliott. I mainly just post on Instagram. It started out exclusively as Catholic apologetics, and now I'm kind of working my way into right-wing politics and political activism. I've only been active on social media for, I think, about 5 months now, but I'm super excited for this debate tonight.
Very good. Thank you so much again for joining us tonight, Ben. Happy to have you here. Next up is Cade, and Cade and I are the two gays in the chat. So he's give the latency. Yeah, there he goes. Now he's like, yee. But yeah, Cade, tell us a little bit about yourself, my friend.
I grew up a normie Catholic, became incredibly devout, went down the rad trad rabbit hole and wanted to become a traditional Catholic priest, and then deconstructed to almost 3 years ago now, and do a bunch of internet commentary on LGBT topics, philosophy, religion, all of that jazz when I have the time.
Very good. And yes, as I mentioned earlier, Cade Bradley is the host of the Intrinsically Ordered podcast, who I was on about 3 or 4 months ago, and it did like really, really well. I'm like, holy fuck, man! You sent, by the way, you sent like, I don't know, 600 people to my YouTube channel. I'm like, that's pretty cool. And no one watches my YouTube because like I never post on there. And I think that's pretty cool. So yeah, pleasure to have you on here. We've been meaning to collab for quite some time, and I think this is the perfect opportunity to do so. And last but not least, we have Logan. And I know I butchered your last name. I'm sorry, my friend. Did I pronounce it right?
No, you didn't. It's fine. Howdy, y'all. My name's Logan Cook. Is how you pronounce it. At least that's how my family pronounces it.
Very good. Okay.
I do mostly theology, but I'm getting a little bit more into kind of what Ben's getting into, right-wing politics. Kind of finding an intersection between the two. And I mean, this is really my second. Yesterday was more of my first debate with Cade, although it was more of a discussion than a debate. But this will be the second one, so I'm excited to see how it goes.
Well, thank you very much, Logan. And now, I guess we can outline. Actually, you know what? I will let the audience know we have ground rules that were laid just before we started with the stream. We have all been over that, so I won't go over it again. I guess now we can go over to the list of topics, and I have that pinned in the chat. I don't have it on my screen because this was like such a last-minute thing. I apologize for the little bit of disorganizing that was going on before the stream. I was like, fuck, we got to get this on now. And I'm like, oh shit, okay. But yeah, I guess we can go over the topics. I just got to go in the chat and we can take a look at it. So here's the chats, folks. Here's the topics, everybody, for the stream. Number one, or rather, no, that's the rules. Oh my goodness. Where did I put topics? Oh yes, topic number one. How should society respond to people with same-sex attraction? And number two, does religion, and in parentheses, Catholicism, provide us a more reliable path to a better world? Sorry, there's a guy on a really like straight piped exhaust outside. I don't know if you can hear that. That's annoying. But yeah, I guess now is a good time for us to start with topic number one. Whoever would like to give their point of view first, you may go ahead. And please just make sure no talking over each other. Yes, whoever has an opinion on that, please go ahead.
I mean, Logan and I talked a lot last night, and I think Ben said that he had a few things that he'd wanted to add to last night's discussion, so perhaps we start in that direction with Ben.
And we're going to address the question of how should we treat same-sex attraction in society?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome. Sweet. So I don't know if anyone saw what me and Logan and Cade were talking about last night, but as I said earlier, I am a devout Catholic. And, you know, from our perspective, same-sex attraction inherently in and of itself is not a sin, right? It's not sinful. It's not immoral to have those, that type of inclination, right? The sin occurs when you act on that inclination. It is still taught that it can occur, right? Of course, I do believe that some people are born with that sort of inclination, but I would view that as a disordered inclination, just as, you know, we live in a disordered world. So I'd say, of course, you don't have to, I guess, practically speaking, when it comes to people of same-sex attraction, of course, I would advocate, I don't think gay marriage is a thing in terms of how we define marriage. I know that the state recognizes this legal contract that they call marriage, and those types of gay quote-unquote marriages exist. But in the eyes of the church, it's not a thing. But you know, I don't hate gay people. I love everybody. I want everyone to be Catholic. But yeah, I mean that's really all I was going to say. I guess we can kind of start working into the meat and potatoes of this.
Okay.
Perfect.
You know what? I do have something to say. Like obviously, I'm sure you are all very much aware. I am a gay man. As I talked about on Cade's podcast, Intrinsically Ordered, at one point, I was an ex-Catholic. And my experience with Catholicism led me down this whole sort of path where I felt like I was inadequate in this world. I have my own experiences with the religion. Obviously, we have no problem with anyone who practices religion. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But for me, I don't personally resonate with it. I'm just curious, what is your definition of marriage? Just to put on the record.
Yeah, I'd say marriage is a lifelong covenant between a man and a woman, ordered towards the procreative act. And I guess a subset of that would also be the spouses take care of each other and you raise a family. But yeah, I'd say it's a lifelong covenant between a man and a woman, which is why I also don't support things like, divorce and remarriage and whatnot. But you're an ex-Catholic, so you understand our position on this.
Yeah, I learned about that all through. Well, I went to a Catholic high school and elementary school because that's a big thing here in Ontario, where I'm from. I'm curious though. It's like I like to think about this whole, like, I'm putting myself in your shoes here, and it's like marriages between two people who can procreate. If that's like pretty much what you said, two people who can procreate, people who will live the rest of their life together, people who will be caring of each other. I'm thinking about the things here where it's like, can all married couples recreate? Because the answer to that is obviously no. And so I'm going to challenge your definition of what marriage is here, because that's not entirely like the big picture. Like, obviously the vast majority, I'm pretty sure, of married couples want to have kids. Some don't. That's okay. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Some choose to adopt, some choose to do IVF. So I'm going to challenge your definition of marriage because that's not the way that it always works. It's not so black and white, So what do you have to say about that in response?
Yeah, no, I think that's a pretty decent response. But part of my definition is that it's ordered towards procreation. So,
okay,
a infertile woman with a fertile man, if they cannot have children naturally, their faculties are still ordered towards procreation. But just because there's an exception where they may not be able to naturally conceive, I don't think means that we need to change the definition of marriage. So I do feel for couples who can't naturally have kids, who cannot, even when they engage in that procreative act, cannot actually procreate. But I don't think that changes the definition by any means, just because, like I said, the whole word there, I think the big word I want to emphasize is it's ordered towards, right? So a man with a man cannot in any way be ordered towards procreation. In fact, it's actually ordered towards quite the opposite. They cannot procreate by any means. Same with a woman and a woman. Or same with two men and one woman, or two women and one man. That's why it's one man, one woman, lifelong covenant ordered towards procreation. But again, that doesn't mean that they have to necessarily procreate. Because again, like you said, sometimes their faculties do not allow them the means to have children naturally.
Okay. But like, if you think about that, I'm aware that a man and a man can't procreate. But as a gay man, I can't help but pose the counter argument here. Why does that matter? Two men can get married. Two men can find a surrogate. Two men can adopt. Because my personal belief is that not all parents should be parents. I'm sure you've seen some of the friggin' atrocities that go on with some parents who can't adequately take care of their kid. So I pose you the question, why does this definition hold so much water in your opinion? Because married gay couples are, in my experience, some of the happiest I've ever seen. And some of the most loving parents.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Although I would push back on the in terms of the happiness section. There's studies done. There's studies done by who's it? Let me see. Sorry, I don't mean to slow us down.
No, take your time.
I literally just saw this.
I encourage you to pull your resources up. Thank you for that.
Yeah, Ben, you can continue, and then I'll jump in with the evidence in a second.
Okay, but no,
sure.
Yeah.
Can you if you could summarize that question just so I could respond to it real quick?
So sure. Essentially what I asked is why does this hard-coded definition of man-woman matter so much to you? Because in my experience, I see so many gay couples, and many of them are very, very loving parents. Many of them take kids out of the system. I don't see why it matters so much, essentially.
Okay, so in 2019, the Pew Research Center actually showed that heterosexual couples are happier than non-heterosexual couples. 40% of married couples say that they're very happy compared to the non-ones.
Compared to non-married couples or non-heterosexual couples?
Non-heterosexual ones.
Okay, I'm going to find that. Give me 1 second. But you had a point, Ben. Were you going to say something? Hold on. While I pull up this study.
I'm just curious. Because I believe the definitions of things matter. I do believe in objective truth. And
Of course.
for all, for all that society is, for all of human society, marriage has been one man and one woman. Or, man and woman, polygamy was a thing. But on the general consensus, to my research, I've not found any sort of society that had formally recognized a marriage between a man or a woman and a woman. And this is just what all of human history has accepted as marriage. Of course, I could argue from the natural law Catholic perspective, why I believe it needs to be one man and one woman, because it's a sacrament, right? And you don't want to dishonor the sacrament and blaspheme it. But I would be curious, what is your definition of marriage? Because if it's just this legal construct where it's kind of like people are dating and they just want to be like this extra step, this extra level of dating, or it's like a man and a man, and like what's the purpose of getting married at that point? Is it just so they can inherit each other's wealth? I'm just curious from your perspective what your definition would be.
Oh, absolutely. I fully appreciate you asking that. I do think that marriage is fully a legal and like social thing. I don't think, because obviously I'm not religious, I don't see that the same way as you do. Marriage is fully just a paper that you sign off on. Because, and again, what is the point of getting married? You don't need to. It's just something that couples of any gender will do if they really love each other that much. I don't like to read into it that much. I don't think it's important to define who can marry each other, because marriage is already a social thing. Marriage is not something that you can say is biologically like hard-coded. That's not it. So that's pretty much like, I don't even read too deeply into it. I just think that marriage it's absolutely a legal thing for me. So therefore, if it's a social thing, I don't think it matters that much, and nor should it matter which two people of which gender are getting married. And I can understand why, as someone like, because I was Catholic, I feel like I'm unique here in the context of like other people you've probably spoken to about things like this, because I learned the things that you learned as like growing up in school. I learned that marriage was between a man and a woman, and only that. And otherwise, it was seen as like, how dare you? You're going to the deepest, darkest pits of hell. But it's like, now that I don't believe in religion, I don't see it like that anymore. And I'm in university. I'm a communications major. I take humanities classes, and I've learned the definition of marriage hasn't even really been the same over all these years. Sorry for rambling too. Just tell me like, if I'm going too off topic here, let me know and I'll dial it back.
No, you're good.
You're good. But all I'm saying though is like, it is entirely a legal thing. It is entirely a social construct. It's not something that is hard coded into humans. It is something that we, over the course of society, have changed. Like, obviously marriage is not a static thing, because marriage has, even in the legal term, it's gone from you can only marry a man, you can only marry a woman, etc., as someone of the opposite gender, to you may marry anyone who you want, at least in Canada. In America, that's in flux right now because of certain things that are happening. But like, I feel like my point has been adequately made about like, marriage isn't...
I would guess.
Yeah, go ahead. I was finished.
I was gonna say, what is the point of marriage in terms of your idea is just legal document? What's the purpose of it then? Why not just stay together outside of like tax reasons? Why not just stay together for lifelong then? You can just stay together at that point.
It's entirely,
it's just
you're
a legal
right.
document.
Mm-hmm. It's
just taxes.
Yeah, absolutely. It's entirely for the status, and I don't think that there's any problems with that. If a man and a woman should be able to, or can get married, a man and a man who have the same love for each other as a heterosexual couple hypothetically would, I think that why should that be like a thing that's in jeopardy? I don't think.
I guess I would argue. What would be what's your idea of the purpose of marriage? Like, even outside of a legal document, like, yeah, you can have that status, but like, what's the purpose of you getting married? Like, in terms of like, because you can say like, oh, you have just for sexual pleasure, for an example. At that point, is that person just for pleasure or for companionship? Because you can still have that and still not be married.
Okay, I'll take what you said. Sorry, Kay, do you have something to say?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Fish this way, where
go ahead.
I mean, as we look across civilizations, we see that societies like to recognize and to promulgate stable romantic pairings in a society, which often can involve the rearing of children. And so I think when we look at marriage, we can look at it from a social perspective, which is some sort of permanence and commitment to a stable romantic partnership. We can look at it from a legal perspective, which is a set of property and inheritance rights, as well as custody of children that may proceed from that bond. And then also on a religious level, that is much more varied, but is something that we see across religions. Even to this day, there are Christians who are married in their Christian church as a sort of social and religious recognition of their importance to that and the afterlife. And so I think we can make the case that if we have these stable romantic pairings and we want to have a stable society in which that is promoted, and socially speaking, we have both the recognition and the commitment that's made at that ceremony. They seem similarly situated. And from a legal perspective, I don't think that procreation is a necessary or sufficient reason that the government ought look at a particular marriage. And then the religious one is ultimately going to come down to somebody's particular religion, but I don't think we'll fry that fish here. But those are sort of the three big categories of how we can look at marriage.
No, that's fair. I had a point to make if no one else has something to say first. I've been talking a lot.
Well, yeah, I figured somebody else. I don't know. I thought Ben or you were going to talk, so I was waiting on y'all.
Yeah, I mean, we can dive into sort of the natural law end of things, in which we say that, I mean, socially, we've seen that marriage or these stable romantic pairings across societies have differed so drastically that I think to make a sort of descriptive case about marriage is technically is something that I don't particularly concern myself with. But then B, I don't see why this procreation element is necessary for our definition of marriage from a legal perspective. I get how it could be important to people, and especially in a religious context, but from a legal perspective, I don't see how two men are not similarly situated as a heterosexual couple. And thus, I think if we make an equal protection case, I think we go, oh, if they're similarly situated, and therefore we can call it gay marriage without putting scare quotes around it.
Cade, do you mind? Could you provide examples from cultures in history that have formally recognized what you said were two romantic partners in a stable relationship, and they formally recognize that as marriage? That were homosexual.
Oh, that is homosexual is a completely different question. So I think the question is societal recognition. We see that varies across cultures in various marriage ceremonies. Something that is elevated to the level of marriage. We see that marriage has taken the form of multiple partners, of consensual and non-consensual rounds, of either permanent or non-permanent forms. But if you said to find the words marriage in a history book involving two men, I'm not aware of any particular examples.
I think I would just push back on that and just Ben can go immediately after me. I'm just going to go on the term point. Even when you said the non-consensual or polygamous, I wouldn't consider those marriage either, regardless of what the society at the time believed it was. So
Yeah,
Ben
but then
can
we get
take
into
that
the
over.
problem, which is if we're making a descriptive claim, then we have to change the definition of marriage. If we're making a prescriptive claim, then we're no longer moored to previous societal norms. Right, so we can make descriptive or prescriptive statements, and we have to be careful in how we're modulating between the two.
So, how would you define marriage in the eyes of history? How if you had to say what's the common denominator there? Because my definition I gave earlier, I do believe is the common denominator. People did see it. You know, of course, there were property reasons. People would transfer property. They would marry for a certain inheritance. But 99% of the time, it was really ordered towards procreation. They would have children. They would have a family, and a family is what runs society. So my question to you still is, because the topic here was about homosexual, inclinations and that kind of thing, and we started talking about gay marriage. Why would we? What is the definition historically? And do you believe that we're changing it to include homosexuals? Or are you saying we're actually not? We're not changing anything to include homosexuality. There never was a really prescriptive definition of what marriage was historically.
Yeah, because I would also add on to that, like even in Greece and Rome, where you do see homosexual relationships in terms of people having homosexual relations with each other, you still see that they're still required to have heterosexual marriages, even just legal. You can like practically and legally, because because it was marriage was even in a, I would say a more more allowing, more liberal society of having homosexual acts just out of the norm, even they understood that marriage is order to procreation, as so did many other and so did many other institutions back then.
I mean, the question becomes, do we see marriage in a Catholic lens of a lifelong union ordered towards the procreation and rearing of offspring and the union of spouses? If we sort of have those three conditions, do you think that has been stable across all of history, Ben?
And what were the three qualifications that you brought up? You said order
Uh,
towards procreation, lifelong union, and the man and woman.
mhm.
Those three. Well, I'm not saying that necessarily. I'd say, of course, in the Western civilization, because Western civilization was built because of Christianity. I mean, Christianity basically built the West. I'd say you see that pretty consistently, right? And of course, if you're talking about like the Anglican Church, that's why King Henry VIII decided to start the Church of England because of his denial for his divorce. Um, I'd say that yeah, you see that pretty consistently. Of course, now there'd be people. Polygamy was pretty common, but not really as much in Western civilizations because of the influence of Christianity there. But I'd say overall, the common denominator there still was a man and a woman in the procreative act ordered towards children, and it was this lifelong union. And and of course, I don't think we would see any sort of homosexual union like that historically. And that's why my gripe with this is today, if we're looking at the way the state recognizes quote unquote gay marriage today, I see that as just we're changing what it really was for thousands of years. And if we're changing it, I want kind of a more solid definition. And I understand, Brady, you said it didn't really matter to you. Like marriage wasn't really a big deal in your perspective. Like it doesn't really mean much. But is that really where we land? Is like marriage doesn't really have much of a definition. It doesn't really mean anything. It's just like a tax write-off at that point. Is that really all marriage is?
Well, if you want a
Those are different
definition of marriage, oh,
questions.
sorry, you have something to say?
I was gonna say those are different questions around stringent definitions and about meaning are two very different questions. But Brady, what were you gonna say?
I was sorry. I was addressing when I think it was about 10 minutes ago. Brady was saying that if marriage is just this legal contract, it really doesn't mean much. Like people don't really need to get married if it's not much more than just a legal contract by the state, recognized by the state.
Okay,
If I can wrap up one thought and then pass it off to
go
you,
ahead.
Brady.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say we don't see the Catholic definition of marriage as permanent across all of civilization. And also, we don't see this modern understanding of gay marriage permanent across all of human civilizations. So it seems like we're both in the same boat, which is marriage has changed over time and seen to be different things. And so I don't think that we need to make a descriptive historical case. I think all of these questions of marriage have changed so much that we can make prescriptive and ought statements when it comes to marriage, because neither of our firm definitions are 100% what it has been for all of history. But that's a whole other rabbit hole. Passing off to Brady there.
Okay, yeah. I've been sitting on this thought for like the past 10 minutes here. I'm like, in my seat. But I think it's funny that you say it's like, what is the point of marriage? What are you going to do? Why might as well just be common law, right? And again, I don't really think anyone else can define what someone's goal is in marriage. I don't want to get married. That is a personal decision of mine. I'd never want to get married. I don't want to be burdened with the responsibility of having children. But even if I did, my goals in marriage would be probably massively different from the goals of the next couple next to me. And I also raise you this question. I don't know why, you don't even really need to add the word gay to marriage. It's just marriage. I'm sure that gay couples and straight couples alike, and any other form of couple, probably have goals in marriage that are different from one another. You can't really say X, Y, Z, or everyone should have these goals in marriage. Everyone gets married for different reasons, right? And also, I feel like this whole argument could change if you just took the word gay out of marriage. People marry each other because they love each other. And I think that's about as simple as it has to be for that explanation. I don't really think you need to read into it that much.
Okay, so let me quickly respond to Caden first, and I'll get to your point, Brady.
Okay.
So, Caden, you were saying that neither of our definitions we've seen 100% consistent with history, right? I would say I don't think we see any gay couples being married historically, and that's why I posed the question earlier. If you could provide me an example of a culture that would formally recognize, even by the state, because if it is just the state contract, formally recognized by the state, of these two men or two women in what we would call a marriage. Because I would say that my definition, even though from people watching or to you guys, the Catholic definition is very it's very strict, right? It's very straightforward. It's pretty cut and dry, black and white. You do see that exists historically, and I would say that's the overwhelming majority, especially in Western culture. I was just asking if you could provide an example of homosexual couples who are formally recognized as married.
I don't see why that would be relevant to if we should have gay marriage or not.
Well, then what is the question still is, in what defines marriage? What is marriage? Because in my mind, even if you're going to take the religion out of it, what other sort of union besides that between a man and a woman procreates and brings forth life? There is no other union that does that, and that is what separates them from a different relationship.
Not from a legal perspective. I mean, we see how our courts adjudicate these matters, and the fertility of spouses doesn't matter. And even a current canon law conception of Catholic marriage is sort of internally consistent but wholly unprincipled, and how it sort of bifurcates these temporary views of infertility and no longer having the faculties to engage in that particular act. The Catholic definition of marriage is convoluted, unprincipled, not seen in history in that particular formulation. So I think the question here is an ought statement, not an is statement.
So the question comes down to so the crux of the question here is just, should the state recognize homosexuals in a marriage as marriage, or should they not? Right? Is that what you're trying to get at right here?
Yeah, I mean, we can both fry this fish from a social perspective and from a governmental perspective. The religious question, I think, is sort of besides the point for how society is looking at this issue in the current day. And so, yeah, I think we can say, should the state allow for two men to get married in the same way that they allow for a man and a woman to get married? And we can also have the question of, should society recognize should society recognize this thing, which oftentimes it's society and then the government, because sort of society is informed by our legal definitions in a great many matters. So I think the legal question is probably the easiest one to fry here and now.
Well, yeah, and I wasn't denying that the U.S. government does not formally recognize gay marriage. They do. I mean, I believe the first time we see that historically was in 2001 in Europe. Correct? Isn't that the first time we see the legalization of gay marriage?
Yeah, that is sort of the first Western legal definition of marriage that explicitly enumerates that two men can get married under the legal system. There are previous cases of individuals like in Minnesota that were two men, where one changed his name to a more feminine name and they got their marriage license and went through with it. But in terms of how courts look at this issue as a phenomena, 2001 seems like the most relevant example.
I guess my question would be, what's the difference for somebody getting from a union to a marriage? If they both get tax write-offs and you consider it's just a legal document, then why do you need to be married? Why not just have a legal union?
If they're interchangeable as a legal concept, why give them a different legal definition?
I'm not saying they're interchangeable as a legal concept. I'm saying if you want just the tax, if tax write-offs is the only thing, and recognition that y'all two are together is the only thing that you need, then why not just have a union rather than a marriage? Marriage, like me and Ben are saying in our definition, is a covenant between a man and a woman ordered towards procreation as a lifelong union. And people don't get married. People don't get married for different reasons. Every straight, even specifically straight couples, they don't get married for different reasons. They get married to have children, to live a life forever together. If they happen to get divorced halfway through, that's fine. Or if somebody is, or if you have, say, a certain, if you have obviously some outliers, but we're not talking about the outliers. We're talking about the general populace and what the actual what majority of people go into marriage to do. It's to live lifelong with each other and to have children with each other.
I mean, that's descriptively not true. We see plenty and even a great plurality of reasons that people get married don't involve procreation, and a great number of straight couples who are getting married um, would explicitly say that they don't want children, and that doesn't actually affect the legal documents themselves. So I don't. That's simply not descriptively true.
Cade, can I add something?
Mhm.
Okay, so one point to make about what you've been saying. Take this, like this whole argument, I'm taking it and rewriting it in my head to be take the word gay out and replace it with straight. And things start to sound ridiculous. Think about it this way. Straight couple, they can't reproduce. They don't meet what is this really traditional definition of the purpose of getting married. Is it acceptable to say, oh, they're only getting together for the tax benefits? They're only getting together because of these benefits that married couples get. Is that reasonable to say, or does that sound like something you would normally say if you put the words straight or heterosexual in the place of gay?
I would argue that, like I said, like me and Ben have been saying, it's ordered to procreation. And if somebody's infertile, there's also things you can do for that. There's regenerative reproduction treatments that are more effective than IVF is. They're more effective. They're more effective than surrogacy is, and they're more ethical too. And they can help infertility for things like I forgot what it's called, but
Endometriosis.
yeah, endometriosis. But just be, yeah, I mean that's my kind of my answer for that. If a couple, like that's a simple answer. If Ben has
Okay,
anything to add on that,
I do. I'm still thinking about this, and like I'm gonna play the part here where it's like not everyone is Catholic, not everyone is religious, not everyone cares about what the Catholic idea of religion is. And also, I could get into the whole thing where it's like, there was a claim, I don't know which one of you said it, but it was like Christians built the West. There's a whole thing to that I'm not, that's not what we're talking about here. Christians built the West through various means that are extremely unethical, and it is the foundation of why Canada needs to reconcile. So no, we're not going to get into that tonight because that's not what the topic of the stream is about. That is a different debate.
That's a whole other issue.
That's a whole other thing.
I just okay, but I would say that we shouldn't bring that up then. If you think we're gonna go unethical
Yeah.
means, I don't agree with
That's
that.
right.
But
That's why I'm saying
then
ignore it.
Just okay, then
Yes.
just,
Strike
we
it
can,
from
why
the
don't we
record.
just cut that then?
That's right. That's right. Nope. Pretend I never said that. But at the same time, it doesn't make sense to say that, oh, I have this view of marriage. It should be prescribed to everybody. For example, like I'm not Catholic. I'm not
Wait,
going
isn't
to.
this the next topic?
What's that? Sorry?
Isn't this the next topic that we're talking about? Like whether or not religion should be included in religious society should be is better than a non-religious society? Isn't this what we're talking about later?
No. This is on the first topic. I was gonna say why. Like, it doesn't matter to me what you think the idea of marriage is. It's like you can say all day long, and we can go in circles saying, I think that marriage is this because of XYZ reason in my faith. You have every right to think that. No one's going to stop you. No one should stop you. But to say that everyone else should prescribe to that idea that's not reasonable.
But aren't you doing the same thing? Because you're saying marriage can be with a man, two men, and it's the exact same thing. I don't believe that, but you're prescribing your belief onto me
No,
and
I'm
everybody else because that's exactly what you're doing.
not
The
at
more
all.
liberalism, all liberalism is and allowing things is it's an idea that you think that just because I'm allowing this, it's a freedom. When if really I'm trying to say I'm trying to like say exactly this. I'm trying to order something towards marriage, like a procreation, man and a woman, but you say, "Oh no, it can be whatever you want." That's still putting your idea onto me, whether or not you just let it be whatever it is. I don't believe that. So I shouldn't have to so why am I going to have to follow your belief?
Logan, you don't have to marry a man if you don't want to, but those who do want to should be able to without repercussions because of religious society.
But you're talking about what marriage is. We don't believe marriage is between a man and a man or a woman and a woman. We believe it's between a man and a woman. Why are you putting that onto the legal system if that's not what other people believe? Not everybody believes that. So it should, if we're going to be, that you can't bring that up if that's your whole point. There's has to be some other kind of logical process to that outside of that.
Well, no, that's the whole thing where it's like marriage is this thing that society has created. It should evolve with society. It shouldn't stay this way because a certain subset of people want it that way. I don't see what point you're trying to make with that.
I mean, the legal argument is in Obergefell v. Hodges is essentially an equal protection clause, which is to say that gay couples and straight couples are similarly situated when it comes to this legal institution, and therefore we ought recognize gay marriage because nothing about the legal institution of marriage is in essence changed by allowing two members of the same sex to become wed in the eyes of the state, because our legal system is essentially gender agnostic when it comes to adjudicating these issues. Ergo, gender is not a necessary part of the legal institution of marriage. That's the
So
sort of the outline of the legal question.
So if the state decided that marriage was only between men and a woman, like it's gonna go over this fall, if the Supreme Court decided that that was unconstitutional and that marriage is between a man and a woman, would you then have to concede that marriage is between a man and a woman only because that's what the law says in terms of American politics?
Yeah, so whatever comes out of the Supreme Court on gay marriage, if they agree to hear a case, is that it gets returned to the states. So the question becomes, what marriages are recognized in what states, versus because then essentially whatever the state governments are recognizing is then how there's so many legal questions on how do we do federalism with different definitions of marriage, which did happen for a period of time. But yes, if the Supreme Court said gay marriage is not allowed from a legal perspective anywhere, then you couldn't make the case that gay marriage is a legal construct.
No, so Kate, I have a question. Maybe I'm
Mhm.
misunderstanding what you're saying here, but so if society is what constructs what marriage is, and then the government is supposed to reflect what society deems is marriage, correct?
Say that one more time. Let me write that down.
So because what I'm trying to find here is I'm trying to find, and I don't know if we can, I don't know if we could come, of course, to an agreement of an objective definition of what marriage is. From what I'm hearing from you and Brady, is society constructs what marriage is or what it is defined to be, and the government recognizes it as such. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah,
Okay,
those two
so
statements are true independently. I think the bridge between them as a sort of like syllogism, there'd be some technical distinctions on, but generally speaking, those would be two true propositions. Because I don't think that teleology is a great way of figuring out what a particular malleable social institution is or ought be.
okay, well, my question that just came through my mind when it comes to this is, if society and the government is what determines what marriage is, before gay couples were allowed to be married, there was no such thing as gay marriage, correct?
From a legal standpoint, correct, yeah.
Well, what other standpoint would you be arguing from if you don't believe in a religious standpoint?
A societal one. 'Cause it's not that whatever society defines, therefore becomes the definition, is that the institution of marriage is inherently socially defined. And there was couples before it was legal in the US that would call their romantic pairing a marriage. The social definition is much more malleable. But from a legal definition, yeah, the construct of gay marriage would not have existed before gay marriage was legally allowed.
So in the United States in like 1930s, gay marriage wasn't a thing. There were no such thing as a gay married couple. Like you'd admit that, right?
Yeah, if it's not there legally, then it's not there legally.
Was it even there socially?
Absolutely. But in the
Yeah,
closet.
there's people that live. Yeah, I mean, there's people that live their entire lives together for 65 plus years together as a stable romantic partnership that I think
Stonewall.
we would recognize now as gay marriage. I don't think that we could say just because somebody defines something a particular way, therefore it is this like absolute truth. Because I don't take this sort of like prescriptive statement about all of these vague social institutions as having like ontology and clear cut definitions to everything. That's much more of a philosophical construct than a descriptively true one.
So, but the question here is like, then how would they be married though? Like they were in this long-term relationship, this gay couple in like 1935 or whatever. They were with each other for 60 years in the closet, but they're not married, right? They're not married. So what I'm still trying to get to is like, what is marriage? What is the actual definition of marriage? Is it just whatever the government deems to be marriage? Because that's kind of what I'm hearing over here is if people decide to live with each other for 60 years and then the government says, "Hey guys, congrats! Now you could be quote unquote married." Is that the only difference? Is the only difference is that the government now formally recognizes you? Is that all marriages is a formal recognition?
From a legal perspective, marriage is a legal thing that didn't exist before then. I think society in the same way that like we can't exactly define what a friendship is other than two people are aware of this concept and agree to engage in the social institution of friendship, or like how do we define what a pickup basketball game is, right? We sort of have like some form of societal recognition, but I don't think like a team as like a concept has ontology, or marriage as a social institution like has ontology to it and therefore a particular definition to it. I think these social categories are negotiated. And so we could say in history there are people that in front of each other and in front of their in front of their communities or the religious leaders before the legal construct of gay marriage said, we want to be married. And well, they realized that it wasn't going to legally happen, they called it marriage and their community around them called them marriage. So I think we can make a descriptive claim about that. But I wouldn't make the case that in the sort of world of platonic ideals that marriage mapped onto some platonic ideal of marriage in this like ethereal world.
Okay, so it's necessary first to be recognized societally, and then later, in your view, hopefully politically, and then that's kind of the crux of marriage, is what it is. So, is there any restrictions around marriage, or no? Is there like, is there should be there some sort of limitations? Like, should I be able to go and marry a 13-year-old? Should I be able to go marry a dog? Like, where's the hard line, and how do we come to that definition?
So there's a few questions baked in. We have the question of what do I want marriage to be? And we see that if we were to include any of sort of the hypotheticals that you were talking about, the legal framework of what marriage it is would have to be entirely reconstructed. And so we're no longer making an equal protection case that straight and gay couples are, in the eyes of the state, similarly situated. If not doing this little 6-7 here, if we talked about the other hypotheticals that you brought up, then we do have to completely overhaul what the legal institution is. I make a much more modest claim, which is under the societal legal definition of marriage as it stands as an American concept, straight and gay couples are similarly situated. Ergo, we recognize gay marriage, because like straight marriage and gay marriage aren't different legal concepts. They're interchangeable, but unconsensual marriages would inherently be a different concept.
Well, I guess I would just ask. So I would say in the 1850s, white people and black people are the exact same thing, but the United States didn't recognize black people as people. So is it just because a legal document says that it exists or doesn't exist, that makes it what it is? I think we can pull out from the legal perspective and go more of what it actually objectively is, rather than just like a subjective claim of what marriage is.
I mean, you're laying out exactly what happened in Loving v. Virginia when it comes to interracial marriages, is exactly what we're talking about here. I think we can say that even before interracial couples were legally married, right? We're talking about the social element, which is they called it marriage, and they entered into a sort of social contract, and it was recognized as such. And even many religious circles, it was recognized as such. So I don't think that we sort of have these three layers of legal, social, and religious as some sort of like one, then two, then three, or some sort of like dependence to them. I think all of them can exist in full or in part at the same time, regardless of recognition from the other. I think we have a grave amount of flexibility on this issue. And I don't think that sort of saying like we need hard lines in the sand or we need this perfect definition solves any of these issues, because the Catholic Church has updated its view of marriage. And we look at canon law as it pertains to now, as these ideas of infertility have changed, as it comes to consent, like all of these things are so changed that I don't think reflexively grabbing at a definition does us any better.
Do you think, I mean, I would try to make the argument that I think a reason why, so, if the state didn't recognize gay couples who were in a social construct with each other for a long time, they didn't recognize that as marriage until, what was it in the United States? What year was it?
In 2015, 2016, that Obergefell came
like
out.
20 yeah.
First gay marriages were up to
2015,
10
yeah.
years before that, according to the states.
Okay, so let's say like 2005 or whatever, roughly. Before then, it was not recognized as marriage. I would argue that there's a benefit to not recognize it as a marriage, because we need to promote I think what we would say is the Catholic perspective of what marriage actually is. We need to promote these lifelong covenants between straight people for the order towards procreation. And I think one of my reasons here is because, and I know it's somewhat of a moot point, but I might as well just put it out there. The birth rate in the United States is very, very low. Right now the birth rate I think is 1.6 kids per family, and that statistically speaking, generally once you're under the number 2.25, that's when you start seeing this rapid declination in the population, because if two people come together and they only produce one kid, and then that kid, another person later in life come together, they only have one kid. Over time, you keep cutting the population in half, right? So I think what I'm saying with a 1.6 birth rate. But second of all, I'd also say, because I would say homosexuality inherently is disordered, and I would even argue. I know we mentioned natural law earlier; we didn't really get into it, but I would say we could even observe from nature it is disordered. It is not natural, and because of that, we should be upholding things that are to be objective. Whether you want to argue or not, I don't know. Of course, from the religious perspective, both of you guys are not Catholic. If you don't mind me asking, Brady, and then we'll go to Cade. What do you guys consider yourselves? Do you consider yourself like an atheist, an agnostic?
I'm an atheist.
Okay.
I prefer the very niche term of igtheism, which is a sort of branch of atheism. Colloquially, you can throw atheism or some form of agnosticism in there, but I find igtheism the most compelling view of looking at religious matters.
Okay, so I was going to say, even if you take the Christian perspective out of this, or even more specifically the Catholic perspective out of this, I would say that I could argue from nature that homosexuality and homosexual acts are disordered. They're not natural, and they should not be promoted because of such, right? And it does not bring forth children. And I'd love to get your guys' response on that. If you don't mind, if you don't want to talk about natural law, that's totally okay. I watched part of I think you had was it a debate or discussion with Joe Heschmeyer? You brought him on your channel. Yeah, that was really interesting.
Yeah, I don't grant teleology / natural law as some effective science to have out there. I think natural law is often this obfuscation of descriptive and prescriptive claims. Because if the question is it natural? The answer is yes, a lot of things are very natural in the animal kingdom, including homosexual acts. If by natural you mean, does it fulfill this predetermined end of procreation? Now you've sort of defined it into existence. So language of like ordered towards is a very tricky teleological concept. And even within the schools of teleology, the like Catholic take on teleology is much more niche than people that even take teleology seriously. So I don't think the natural law is something that we can seriously engage in. I don't think the natural law in how Thomas Aquinas, as I have the Summa here, talks about it. I don't think that that is helpful or true in how it's formulated. And so I think the claims of is it natural? The answer is yes. Does it fit Thomas Aquinas' particular view of sexuality? Then the answer is no, but those are two different questions.
I would argue that's not natural at all. Like even I raise animals. I have cattle, dogs, pigs. I
Mhm.
have chickens. I have everything. We would still consider homosexual acts between two animals intrinsically disordered. We would like
But
that.
but then you're
For,
not dealing with the question of natural, right?
it's not that
Natural
because it's
in a
unnatural.
no, but we're making a separate argument here. If by natural we mean does it fulfill a Catholic view of teleology, that's a different claim than natural in a colloquial definition, which is this occurring in nature, right? Natural is smuggling in a bunch of meaning that I don't grant in the premise to begin with.
If you have the general population of animals, which it's 99.9% of animals, like, if not higher, there's a very small animals who do have homosexual relations, and those are typically the ones where you see that they typically have dwarfism. They typically have some type of psychological disorder within the animal that especially in livestock that we have, they have some type of other condition within them. Like this, I'm not saying it's the same thing for humans. I don't know, but my point is with animals in terms of not humans, it is unnatural and it is intrinsically disordered. Even in because from a breeding perspective, we want to have animals who do reproduce. The point, and especially rabbits. Rabbits mate like 1,000 times, 100 times a day, but they mate for life, and that's the difference. And they mate for specific purpose, and it is to procreate. They have no other purpose. It's not just for. It's not for just pleasure. While they get pleasure from it, that's not the point. The point of it is to procreate and to continue the lineage.
But now we're muddying terms. If the prior, right, if we're admitting a prior into this conversation, is that anything that doesn't fall under a Catholic definition of sexuality is disordered, right, then you've sort of smuggled in this premise into the conversation. If we're looking at this from a descriptive or a historical or a biological perspective, then these claims of being non-natural simply aren't true. So whenever we use this language of ordered towards, or unnatural, or to fulfill its end, we're talking about something different than a descriptive look at the world. And now we're making ought claims, which we're all making ought claims here. But I don't think appealing to nature in smuggling in terminology does anything for the argument per se.
So you wouldn't believe that there's some sort of inherent biological purpose to our organs in our body?
Descriptively and how things have evolved, yes. Prescriptively and ontologically, no.
So would you say it is disordered for someone who has bulimia, right? The eating disorder where they eat food for the sake of the taste and they enjoy it, but then they force themselves to throw up right afterwards, all the food that they just had, and they lack all the nutrition that they just consumed. Would you say that that is disordered?
So if we're frying it from a psychological lens, now we're admitting and smuggling in disordered in a psychological term, in which we're talking about etiology and pathology, and we talk about treatments. The statement is anorexia. Is it disordered? I would want to clarify in what way are we using that word, because I'm not using disordered in this natural law teleological view, and so I wouldn't describe it as such under your framework because I don't grant your framework. People may use that word, but they're using it in a very different context than how you're smuggling in meaning.
So okay, so you wouldn't grant that it is, and I still will use the word disordered. You wouldn't grant that it's disordered on a biological, in a biological sense. That eating food for the sake of the enjoyment you get from it, but then completely revolting it back up out of your stomach, does that not thwart some sort of biological teleological purpose, or you just don't grant that at all? You don't think that we have this teleological biological purpose?
Yeah, I don't grant teleology in the way that you're formulating it. So it seems like a sort of actually when it comes to like it's not disordered, but it's because admitting that word into the conversation in common parlance or how normal people use the word disordered is a way that we're smuggling in a Catholic framework. So I have to be like quite technical on saying no if what by disordered we mean is under a Catholic teleological view. The answer is no because I don't grant that view.
Well, I think most people, even non-Catholics, would say that they recognize that is disordered in a sense, right? That even if they don't uphold Catholic natural law to a T, they don't agree with everything that the church teaches when it comes to natural law. they would still say that, you know, they recognize that that's not normal, that's not right, because food is meant to be consumed and not thrown back up.
Uh, But that's how, in common parlance, the word disordered means a myriad of things. And when people use it and you say, hey, what do you mean by disordered? They're not going to formulate disordered in the way that you're trying to get somebody to admit to. They're going to use that word in a very different way, like in a psychological way, in which we see that eating disorders have harm for people. And we have pathologies and we have treatment approaches. That's what they mean by disordered, not the way that you're using that word.
Okay, so then what word would you use to describe eating disorder of such?
Well, it would depend on, in common parlance, would I say disordered? The answer is possibly. If I'm having a technical discussion on philosophy, that's a very different question.
Okay, but would you say it is not? Would you say it's not good? You know, if someone has bulimia, where they're throwing up their food afterwards because they don't want to actually receive the sustenance of the food. They just want to eat it for pleasure.
That's not the way I would say it is not good in, right? I'm not saying that eating disorders are something that ought be taken seriously and treated with psychological care because they sort of thwart the teloi of food and the digestive tract. Because even if we grant teleology, something like diet soda wouldn't be allowed under a teleological framework because it's purposely made to thwart the nutritional end of food. I don't see food or the digestive tract as having ends in the way that we're talking about teloi. We can use the term disordered in a psychological context, but that means something entirely dissimilar to what you're talking about.
Sorry, there's a break in conversation. I'm just letting you all know. We're almost at an hour on this topic. So in about 4 minutes, and by the way, thank you all for remaining respectful. I appreciate that. No flame wars. Y'all are doing a good job. Thank you for remaining respectful. 5 minutes. We're going to take a brief intermission. Then we're going to come back and do topic number 2. So just FYI, as you were.
Awesome. So, Kate, do you see where I was going with this? I mean, I know you don't grant the way I'm using the word disordered is. So, I mean, can I ask you? It's a pretty blunt question, but like, what is sperm for? Do you don't believe it's for anything specifically?
When we use this word for, there's a common use of that word in which I can say descriptively, it can be used for a particular end. If what we mean by for is baked in inherent meaning, that if we are to thwart it, we are breaking some sort of natural law, the answer is no. Because if we look at something like the reproductive system, we can descriptively say that it is used for procreation, but we know across the animal kingdom it is not used solely for that. And even how our bodies regulate the reproductive system, it's not that every time that it is used, it creates new life. So descriptively, we can say it is for something, but it's not an exhaustive statement because descriptively, it is also for other things besides just that.
For the kingdom, for animal kingdom, where is it not used for procreation?
I mean, to put it bluntly, monkeys are known to have solo sessions. Like, there's all sorts of recreational sexual activities that animals do across the animal kingdom that doesn't always end in something that can procreate. And we see animals also engage in sexual activity after their fertile years, and we see both across legal systems. We also recognize that, right? Like, we can say descriptively that genitals can be used for something, but that descriptive and limited claim is not a universal law if we sort of say in common parlance this one chunk of text.
I wouldn't say an occurrence of a monkey or a chimp having a solo session doesn't change the definition of what sperm's for. Maybe that doesn't change the definition of what the sperm is for. It just changes of how the monkey, I guess, uses it, which is still we would consider in the animal kingdom as an animal researcher disordered. It's still incorrectly being used. In the exact
but
same
you're
way as
imposing
if
a
person-
framework in there.
No, it's still intrinsically wrong. Even if like as a researcher, it's still intrinsically wrong because it's not being used for its purpose. The purpose of sperm is to go into the woman's egg and to inseminate it. That is why we have that's why we have that's why we have artificial insemination, for example, within animals, because because sperm is to be used for insemination and nothing else.
But you're confusing descriptive and prescriptive claims. If you're imposing a framework that says that's disordered, then the answer is it's disordered. If the question is how do you prove that things have teloi in Aristotelian Catholic formulation of it, that's the question at hand.
Yeah, so
I'm
how
not
do
even,
you
I'm
prove-
not even
how
going
do
on
you-
a Catholic standpoint. I'm going on an animal biologist standpoint. It is disordered. I'm not even talking about Catholicism. If a chimpanzee has a solo session, that's still disordered, whether or not it's a human chimpanzee or any kind of animal. It is not a presupposition. It's a framework that's given not even by Catholic view, but by a secular animal biologist view.
I mean, you're not going to find that in a serious academic biology textbook where they're going to call that disordered, because we know that sex is a prophylactic thing in our hormonal and neurological systems. So biologically, it's not disordered. If you admit a prior in, now we're having a moral discussion. But if we're having a biological descriptive question, then you're going to have to bring up some biologists that are going to talk about descriptive things in a pseudo-moralistic framework, which you're not going to see in serious academic work on biology. But what was it, Ben, that you were about to chime in with?
I was just gonna say, so I mean, I guess you don't grant the premise that things have a telos in a Catholic framework. How would you see something like sperm? What would be another use of it? Like, what would be another purpose? Because I mean, I guess if you're a you're not a theist, right? But you would affirm some sort of like macroevolution, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, of course, right. So the way we've evolved and the way that has evolved, what what other use besides fertilization is sperm for?
So if we're making an evolutionary claim, we can, in common parlance, say this developed for something. But we have to be very technical here, because what is attempting to have happen here is to admit a common phrase and to have it mean something that we don't mean in common parlance. So when we talk about something like sperm, we see that across the animal kingdom, not every sperm that is created matches with one particular egg. So we can make a descriptive claim, which is how animals evolved sexually, and then we can also make a descriptive claim about how that is used by animals. And those are two separate questions, which often have the same word, but we have to be very careful that we're not smuggling in meaning that the average person doesn't mean. Because if they say disordered about any of these examples that we're having a blast discussing, that's not what the average person means by that seemingly normal and average phrase.
Also, last point, everyone.
no.
We're going to have to wrap it up here. So final thoughts right now, because I really have to go to the bathroom. But continue.
Okay.
Uh,
I was just gonna say,
do you
I
want
was
to
just
close, Ben, or
eating-
should I?
At your leisure.
What would you prefer, Ben?
What was the question?
Do you want to wrap up as we're talking about final statements? Do you want to have the last word, or do you want to go and then give me the last word? Up to you.
I'll go really briefly, and you can sum it up. My whole point here is, I think you brought up like the average person, the general consensus around these things, and they wouldn't use the term disorder in the way we would with Catholic natural law and natural theology of the body and whatnot. But I think most people would say like sperm is for the egg, like sperm is to fertilize eggs, right? I mean, is that not something you would grant either? Do you think most people wouldn't grant that premise?
People would say that, but not in the way that you are intending it to mean, and to smuggle in a separate framework. So do people say that? Yes. Would I say that when I'm talking to friends in a biology class? Yes. But I hate to be like very technical here, because there's something else that's being smuggled in with a seemingly benign term.
And what exactly am I smuggling in? I mean, to me, it just seems like a pretty basic biological question. Sperm's really sole function is to fertilize eggs.
I have something to add here. Does it matter? Okay, and I'm only saying this because who does it harm if you flush it down the fucking toilet? Or does it matter if you throw the fucking condom in the garbage at the end of the night? Or does it matter if it doesn't result in a child? And you can even use that, hey, we were unsuccessful in procreation. I think that's a very flat argument to say that, like, because I know we really, like, we got into it with this whole thing. It's like, hey, we got to procreate, right? But, like, it doesn't matter that much. who does it harm if there's no procreation? Who does it harm if the sperm goes nowhere? Like, the purpose of sperm is a little irrelevant here, I think. But one last thing, and then we're going to call it a break, and then move on to the next topic.
You want me to respond to that real quick?
Yeah.
Yeah.
In summary.
So, like I'd say, like, if you flush your stuff down the toilet, it's not going to harm me personally. But I don't think that's where I derive what is right and what's wrong. My whole point here, I guess I'll just make my concise point, because I don't know if we're really going to go anywhere here, and then that way I'll let Cade have the last word before we finish.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, if you guys are familiar with the idea of natural law and the Catholic perspective of theology of the body, my whole point I was trying to make is that if sperm is for the egg, if that is how nature has deemed it, right? And I would say, of course, as a Catholic, that is how God created it. But if the purpose of sperm is to fertilize egg, to thwart that natural end is disordered in some sense. Now the question can come, is that immoral to do something disordered? Well, I'd say it's disordered, it's unnatural, and it should not be, it really shouldn't be advocated for. And homosexual acts are, again, I would argue, intrinsically disordered because it intentionally thwarts the natural end of what it was designed to be, or what it evolved to be, right? So, and of course, I'd say, yeah, I mean, that doesn't harm me specifically, right? But that's why as Catholics, we don't affirm, sodomy, contraception, IVF, masturbation, like none of those things, because it really does. Of course, we could throw the Catholic moral framework into it, but I would say I do believe you can't separate it, because even before Catholic theology, even before St. Thomas Aquinas adopted it from Aristotle, and ultimately further back Socrates, this idea of nature has law, nature has purpose existed. So, and I'd say that's the harm there, is it is unnatural, it is disordered. But again, like I said, I don't really know. I doubt we're going to come to a consensus on that. But Cade, I'll give you the last word.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I think the questions of gay marriage and the trick that's pulled off in order to not support it is some modulation and confusion on how we use terms, like how do we describe history. Right? We can make historical arguments of what has been, but we see that what we want is not always what has been. When it comes to these questions on what things are for, we said even in a Catholic framework that this idea of sperm being for a particular thing isn't completely honored when we look at this idea of the Code of Canon Law across society. So I think when we arrive at these discussions, and as people are thinking at home, the question is an ought question, not a convoluted is question about things that are out there. I think that if we grant the Catholic framework of natural law, which isn't even taken seriously by other people who look at natural law, if we look at specifically the Catholic conception, it is internally consistent but wholly unprincipled. Because if we start the conversation with what are things ordered towards, I don't think we can honestly arrive at the Catholic specific definition of marriage purely from description, unless we somehow smuggle in a much more religious source that's out there. So I think when we have these questions of gay marriage, the world that I want to live in is one in which stable romantic partnerships between two consenting adults is allowed. And the question at the start of this was, how ought society respond to people with same-sex attraction? And whatever we want to say about birth rates, whatever we want to say about things out there, I know that my life has only been made better, that I have only been made more virtuous, and that my life and the people around me have only been made better by the relationships that I've been in. And that gay marriages are a beautiful thing, whether we talk about raising children or leading beautiful lives of self-sacrificial love. And that's the world that I want to inhabit. And then I think that sort of leads us into point 2, Brady.
Can I go just really fast? Like 30 seconds.
30
I don't take
seconds.
that long. All right.
Yeah.
I would say that I would, as me and Ben Elliott said, that marriage is intrinsically a man and a woman. And this is because men and women are not the same. Two men cannot give a child what a man and a woman can give him. A man cannot do what a woman can do. They're two completely different things. And this is where we mess up in terms of thinking men and women are equal, but we're trying to mix them up and saying that they're the same when they're not. Men and women need each other for companion because opposites do attract. They complement each other, while a man and a man would not. This isn't even like more of like what we were talking about in terms of our whole entire idea, but I would say that a man and a woman are the only thing. The question is what we ought to do. We ought to do is to make sure that the legal wraps up with the reality, which is men and women are naturally obliged to be with one another, as natural law shows, within sexual orientation.
Okay, well, thank you all very much. That was topic number 1. I appreciate the respectful discussion. I really need to use the bathroom, so I'm going to sneak out of the frame for a few seconds. You guys are going to be off the air, so don't worry. You can talk shit about me when I'm gone. But,
Yeah.
we will be back very soon, everyone. Don't go anywhere. Twitch, YouTube, TikTok. We will be 2 seconds, okay? Enjoy a little bit of fucking Steely Dan, apparently. Okay. I don't know how y'all feel about that, but we will be right back, everyone. 2 seconds.
Your everlasting summer, you can see it fading fast. So you grab a piece of something that you think is gonna last. Well, you wouldn't even know a diamond if you held it in your hand. The things you think are precious, I can't understand. Are you reeling in the years? Stowing away the time? Are you gathering up the tears? Have you had enough of mine? Are you reeling in the years? Stowing away the time? Are you gathering up the tears? Have you had enough of mine? You've been telling me you're a genius since you were 17. In all the time I've known you, I still don't know what you mean. The weekend in the college didn't turn out like you planned. The things that pass for knowledge I can't understand. Are you reeling in the years? Stowing away the time? Are you gathering up the tears? Have you had enough of mine? Are you reeling in the years? Stowing away the time? Are you gathering up the tears? Have you had enough of mine?
Sorry, that took a really long time, everyone. I was like fucking 3 cups of water. That was a lot. I gotta like not drink that much during the stream. I was like pounding a few back, don't mind me. But for those of you who are still with us, holy shit, we actually haven't been live for this long in a really, really long time. But we are back for the second part of the debate stream. My mic is on, right? Yes, okay, just making sure. Second part of the debate stream. I'm gonna hand it back over to the Discord in just a few. But if you're just joining us now, the first topic we talked about tonight was, I don't remember exactly verbatim what it was, but it was about gay marriage and how it relates to Catholicism, etc. They're going to correct me once I put them back on the air. I'm not worried about that. But anyways, let us turn it back over to the Discord, who is now back on the air. Hello, everyone. Oh,
What's up, y'all?
there we go. What's going on, everyone? Y'all are back.
We're back.
Yep. Well, first of all, I will say, what are you holding? Is that a DVD?
No, it's
No.
an icon.
It's a
Oh,
icon.
I thought it was a DVD case.
That's
I didn't
Saint
see.
Michael.
I didn't see what was on. I didn't see what was on it.
It's St. Michael.
This is the Say Christ is Lord Sheila Booth meme. Say Christ is Lord.
Shut the oh.
Wow. You are allowed to swear on the stream,
No,
by the way.
that's
Don't
what he
worry
said-
about
That's what he
that.
says in the movie.
Anyways,
Padre,
folks.
Padre Pio did not say
Oh,
that
God.
in real life.
No, he did
I-
not. But it was really good. I really liked that scene. It was really cool.
Oh, Padre Pio.
All right, folks. What do you say about
Somebody
topic
said,
number
no,
2?
I can't hear you, Brady.
Huh?
I
No,
don't-
they're fucking
somebody-
lying. No, people are dicks in the chat. Like, I think I would know if I was off, but yeah, I think we're okay. But anyways, I appreciate the discussion we had with topic number 1. But topic number 2,
How ironic. I'm just kidding.
right? I have a lot to say about it, but because like, if you let me go for too long, it's just going to be me talking. So someone else, actually, no, let me read the topic because it's somewhere in here. I completely forgot where I put it. What the hell? It's one of these things. Oh, come on. I'm stupid. Oh, yes. Does religion, does religion, Catholicism, provide us a more reliable path to a better world? That is topic number 2. If anyone would like to take it away, please feel free.
I feel like you got to kick it off,
I-
Brady, since I yapped so much. Or Logan can go for it.
Sure.
I was going to start off. What were we going to define as a stronger society? I would decide as unity, a community, obviously lower substance and crime, as well as family stability and charity, as well as social services. You can find in the Pew Research Center in 2019, religious attendance is linked to stronger community ties and a higher civic participation. In terms of lower crime, the Pew Research Center in 2017, religious involvement correlates with lower rates of substance abuse. For family stability, the Institute for Family Studies, children in stable married households show better outcomes in education and mental health and income. But in charity, the Georgetown Center for Applied Research and Apostolate, Catholic charities are among the largest non-governmental providers in education, healthcare, and poverty relief worldwide. And specifically in Pew Research Center 2019, regular religious attenders report higher happiness and life satisfaction. As well as the Catholic Church was very strong in human rights. Actually, in terms of colonization, it was the Pope and as well as Queen Isabella who said that these are subjects of the crown and they should be treated as humanely as possible. While the people who were colonizing were they wanted to treat them correctly, contrary to popular belief, I'd say.
Okay.
And if anybody wants to respond to that, or if Ben wants to go, it
Sure.
doesn't matter to me.
I do have something to say. First of all, I do want to acknowledge all of the good that Christianity does in the world. None of that is lost on me. I think it's very important to look at the bad as well as the good. I'm aware of a lot of Christian charities that do really, really good work in my community. I'm aware that religion brings a lot of people feelings of happiness, feelings of belonging, feelings of community. As a sound engineer, I've worked in a lot of churches. I know what it's like to be like, as an atheist, I fully realize that there is a community in a lot of these things, and that's not lost up on me. I think that's amazing. The only thing I really want to put a spotlight here on is the fact that in a lot of instances, and don't let this, like, I'm kind of trying to spotlight both sides of this argument here, because on one point, I fully understand that religion does do a lot of good, or rather, I'm saying religion as a whole, but Catholicism and Christianity, I guess, generally, they do a lot of good. However, in my experience, what I have seen is a lot of people using various quotes that I admittedly cannot recall off the top of my hand throughout my passages in life as being a gay guy in a smaller town, growing up amongst Catholics, amongst people who go to church, and then being ostracized by them slowly but surely because they don't like who I am, reciting Bible quotes. There's a lot of hatred that stems from people using religion as a meat shield, essentially. It's like, in a way, I'm going to say this really horrible thing about someone, but I'm going to use my religion to justify it and say, well, I can say it. And here's an example of that. I don't know if any of you know who Big Nick is. He's the guy on Cade knows who I'm talking about. One of my most popular videos, he said that Canada was going to outlaw Christianity, and that's objectifiably false. That is not what this bill said. This was like in 2023, I think. This bill that was taken horribly out of context. It was actually doing was preventing people from using religion as grounds for hate speech. And he had gone on and said, well, Christianity is being taken away. It's like you can't even say what you want anymore. I absolutely do not think that you should be able to use your religion as grounds for hate speech. And that is my leg that I'm going to stand on here. To say that, yes, while religion does a lot of good things and does benefit society, I don't think those good things should be lost on any of us. The bad things, the people who stand behind religion, the people who cherry pick things and use that as leverage against the marginalized, against the people who a lot of religious people, a lot of Catholic Christian people don't support. I think that's one of the most, it stands out a lot more to me because I have experienced it fucking firsthand, as have many of my friends in the LGBTQ plus community. That's the main problem that I have and why I feel like the cons do outweigh the goods most of the time.
What do you define as hate speech exactly? Like, 'cause I mean, I've seen people. Oh, I mean, I only ask that because I've seen people who define like just being being critical of someone's actions and telling them that they're doing wrong respectfully is hate speech. And I would also want to point out that a religious society, as a general rule, at least maybe it's different in Canada, but I would say as generally a religious society specifically, we're talking about Catholicism. We can just say Catholicism. A Catholic society doesn't preach hate, and majority of the people wouldn't. I would say it would be a very small portion. And granted, are those people more louder than others? You could argue that, but we're not going to argue a whole entire society just because of what they say is objectively worse for society when there's so much more. I would say the good outweighs that.
Okay. Fair point about not everyone saying those things. In fact, one of my very good friends, who's also a moderator on the stream, Ethan, he's been a devout Christian his whole life. He is gay. And he is the example that I use every single time I talk about, here's a Christian who I can personally vouch for because he is a good person. He treats people, you know, when God said, treat people the way you want to be treated, that is he lives by that. I can vouch for that motherfucker, like until the day I die. I fully understand that's not everyone, and I'm not trying to generalize at all. I always make it a point to clarify, no, I am not generalizing that all Christians are like this. But yes, it is entirely possible that those who are hateful are louder. And also, to define hate speech, I'm going to use the example of the Westboro Baptist Church. I don't know if you've heard the things that they say on the internet. Okay, so while you're
I thought we were talking about Catholicism.
Well, you know what? Very good point. That they are not a Catholic like church, right?
Like me and Ben wouldn't consider them. I mean, the Catholic Church considers them not.
They're
like,
more like a Christian
like
subset, right?
50%
They're
Christian.
Christians.
They're Anabaptists. They're not even really considered Protestants.
There's
They're their
like
own,
there's thousands of fucking sects of religion.
they're an offshoot. That's besides the
Yeah,
point.
no-
They have no like real consensus of who they are.
Mhm.
Like you'll go into like Southern America, and you'll not South America, but Southern America, and those people like non-denominationals, which are they're basically Baptists without the name. But you can continue.
Okay, no, you do make a good point. They are not Catholic. Very, very good point. However, I will say in my personal life, I have been called things that are not very nice by people who have met me in passing, or people on the internet who say, I'm Catholic, you're a insert 3-letter word. It's like, I get that impression. A lot of people who identify as Catholic are telling me these things. And it's like, I kind of put 2 and 2 together. And especially even when I played sports, a lot of people who identified as Catholic bullied the fuck out of me in high school. Didn't feel great.
So they identified Catholic, or they were practicing Catholics?
They made themselves very
Catholics.
They made it aware that like, hey, I go to church. I am a Catholic. I don't know what that qualifies as, but like, I think if you go to church, that would mean you're a practicing Catholic, right?
I mean, I think you know better than just going to church doesn't really qualify as you a Catholic. I know plenty of people who go to church. They're not very good people. There's obviously things you have to do, and like I would say, do you still live in the small town?
No, I live in Toronto now. It's no, not anymore.
Okay, well, I mean, Canada's also a lot different than I would say America is in terms of Houston. I live in Houston. I'm from College Station.
Okay.
We have plenty of gay people who are Catholic, and we don't treat them like that. The population doesn't treat them like that because that's one, disrespectful. 2, it is against our religion. 2, not just, I'm not saying discriminate, but to be hateful towards them. Like we can we can we can say that what they're doing is wrong in terms of being in terms of homosexual acts. We can explain that that's wrong to them in a charitable way without having to be disrespectful. But I still think even if the disrespect exists, I would still say that there is still a greater good, even with that being true. And I'm not saying I want that to be true. I'm saying there is still a greater good of the church than just that.
I don't like, see, here's the thing. I don't know how I feel about that because, like, imagine taking a part of someone that they can't change, because I assure you, I would not have chosen to like men if I didn't have to. But put yourself in the shoes of a gay person like me, who's learning all these things, who actually went, like, obviously I went to a Catholic school here in Ontario, and one of the things that we had to go through in grade 7 and 8 was we read this big green textbook. I don't know what the fuck it was called. It was a religious textbook, and it's like, you may not marry a man. You have to marry a woman. If you do any of these things, or if you masturbate, etc., other things that, like, I'm not going to name on stream, you're going to hell. Mortal sin. Almost as bad as murder. And it's like, I understand from some people who don't know any better and who I think lack the skill of empathy. I feel like they want it to come from a good place, but it doesn't. Like, again, I don't want that to be cast on me. I don't think anyone should be victim to being told your life is wrong because I think it is, and that's because what I've been told. And because, well, I want you to not be this way. But, like, doesn't matter. You know?
Well, I think that people say, so I wouldn't say that sorry, Ben, were you going to say something?
Yeah, can I respond real quick?
Yeah,
Is that
sure.
okay?
Yeah, I've been talking so much. I'm so sorry.
No, it's chill. So Brady, I guess my question for you is, I mean, first of all, man, I want to apologize. I'm sorry for a lot of the hateful stuff on their behalf. I want to apologize on their behalf. A lot of the hateful stuff that Catholics have said or called you before. You know, I guess my point would be, you know, there's definitely a difference between the church and the people who are in the church, right? There's a difference between Catholicism and Catholics, in the sense that, you know, I guess if the question is Catholicism good for society? Of course, I'd say yes. And if one of your bones you have to pick with it is that there have been Catholics who have said a lot of nasty stuff, a lot of hateful things, and they may even been quote unquote devout Catholics, I'd still say that the religion itself does not breed hate. I mean, if anything, the religion itself, you know, as you know, Catholicism is all built on sacrificial love. I mean, it's all built on the crucifixion of Christ and his resurrection and his love for the world, his ability to humble himself as the God-man, to be taking the form of a slave and then being crucified. So I'd say the religion itself is not hateful, unless you would say that, you know, the statement to say like homosexual acts are sinful, if that sentence is hateful, then maybe, but I would like a little bit more, if you could provide a little more of a concrete definition of hateful speech. You mentioned that Baptist church, and while you mentioned, I actually looked them up. I remember watching a YouTube documentary on them, and they're the ones that have all those really disgusting signs that they hold in the streets, and they have like their 6-year-old kids hold up a bunch of slurs and stuff. And of course, I'd say I hope you know that does not represent Christians as a whole. I mean, those
I recognize that they're not
affiliated.
affiliated. They're very, very niche. I do recognize that 100%. They're very.
I would also like to
yeah.
make the sorry, this isn't really a point to make, but my mom's watching the stream. She told me she wanted to give you a hug, and she's sorry. She's also sorry.
Okay, well, please tell your mom I extend a virtual hug to her. I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
She's watching the stream right now.
Aw,
so
that's
she
cute.
heard
That's
that.
cute.
But you can continue. I would more of just go along with Ben. I think if I would say they don't represent what a Catholic would be or should be in terms of, we're talking about a Catholic society where a majority of them would be we'll say majority. If we're looking for a Catholic society, we're saying majority of them would be practicing. I would say that people who would hate on you, if like say, not talking about Ben's example of like, oh, if we're saying that this is, if someone telling you this is distorted of you having like a relation with a man, if that's hate speech, I'm more of on just like disrespecting you for the fact of you being gay. I would rather say a Catholic society would rather hate on the other person for hating on you, because by being hateful you are sinning, and that's just as bad as killing someone, as the Bible says.
I absolutely recognize that. And I think I'm going to amend what I said earlier. Again, I know a lot of Catholic people who are very, very lovely and who do not exude these like who do not say hateful rhetoric towards people who are different. I wish everyone was like that. And I feel like the problem that I have is that more people are not like that. And to me, it looks really, really bad that I've had so many negative experiences with people who identify with the religion, and they give it a really, really bad name. And I'm not going to say that I haven't had people in the comments of my videos on TikTok who have been, oh, you need to repent and turn to God, which, like, I don't know. I laugh at that every time I get that. And it's like, I feel like I've made that abundantly clear. It's like, no. But I also get the people who are like, Brady, I'm Christian. I appreciate you. You should be loved just the same. Jesus loves you no matter what. And it's like, I appreciate that. Even though I do not identify with the religion, I appreciate that. I feel like I kind of have to give a little more leeway because obviously we love people of all religions. At least, like, that is something that I pride myself on. I have a lot of bad blood with Catholics, with Christians, people of Roman sort of descendant of like religions. You know what I mean? Right? Like Christian, Catholic, all of the various sects that branched off of that. I have a bit of a bone to pick with a lot of them because I have had so many negative experiences. And I totally, totally understand what you're getting at. It's like, it does not represent the views of everyone. A lot of them need to do better because a lot of them paint a very, very bad picture. And that is what I have mostly seen. And that is why I don't have a very favorable view of people who are Christian / Catholic.
Yeah, and I mean, I
Yeah.
would just more of going. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I guess I would just more of say that I don't like. Yes, they obviously don't make a representation of us, but it seems majority of like I guess the argument against a religious society would because we're gonna assume that like majority of like I said we're gonna assume most of them are practicing Catholics, Christians, whatever you want to say. Majority of your view comes from I would say it's considered a religious trauma if you want to if you that's okay for me to contextualize it.
I think that's valid. Absolutely.
Okay. So I don't think that as like I wouldn't say that I would use that as a reason why we shouldn't have it because the thing about that is that if we're saying that those people don't represent the issue with them isn't that they're Catholic, the issue is that they're not with Christ. Because if they were with Christ, they would be more merciful, they would be more loving, they would be more charitable to you even though you're homosexual. They would tell you that God loves you, but because he loves you, they want you to. But I mean, even then, somebody who's trying to evangelize, they shouldn't lead off with, "Oh, you're a sinner." They should lead off with, "Jesus Christ loves you," and that and then eventually, yes, you can be like me and Ben will tell each other that that we're sinning, that we're wrong, and that's just how me and him are because we have that kind of because we understand that it's better for us to talk to each other about what's right and wrong than some random person coming up to us.
Okay. No, and I totally understand that. However, I will say this to counter that. A lot of the advice that I have gotten from a lot of religious folk, the negative ones, has been, you're sinning, you're homosexual, how dare you do this, and absolutely you're blasphemizing my religion. It's like, that doesn't matter to me. It's like a lot of this advice has been unwarranted. It's like, I didn't ask for your opinion. It doesn't matter to me what you think about what I do in my private life, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that. Like, it's just some random person doesn't have the. I mean, I don't think we should. I don't go up to random people and tell them that what they're doing is wrong. I feel like that's one just inappropriate. For two, I don't know that person, so whatever I say is not going to have any weight. And if anything, it's just going to make the issue worse. And they're gonna have a bad response to what I say. Rather than if it's me and somebody I'm close with, or me and somebody I know, they were gonna have a better response because they're gonna understand that I'm coming from a place of love and charity rather than the other person.
But does
So
the
I would
other
agree.
person
Yes,
realize
people
that?
shouldn't just randomly come up to people and be like, "Oh, you're being a piece of you're being a piece of crap." I'm sorry, Cade, you can go.
I was going to say if to find common ground, if we define love as to will the good of the other as other, the question becomes, what is it that religion in principle is willing? And I think when we look at, if we take the catechism here seriously, even if we fill out and have the perfect view of what a Catholic is, we see that individuals with same-sex attraction are, in many ways, harmed and have lifelong consequences for what they are told, even in the nicest way possible, which is your attractions are intrinsically disordered, that you may never indulge in them and create a stable lifelong union, that under a Catholic governing system, that gay couples would not be able to have kids, let alone be couples per se. And the question isn't do religious people match up perfectly to the ideal of that religious text? The question is, what is the expected outcome of increasing a particular religion? And then two, does the harm that we often see, is that, does religion provide a cover story to enable worse things to happen? I tend to see religion as a natural phenomena. And so as a group of, when it comes to social cohesion, we would expect better outcomes for groups that are inherently pro-social. But I don't think religion has a monopoly on that. And I think what we can see is specifically across Catholicism is that because these ideals are locked away and that they're untouchable because God has said so, we see that tremendous harms are able to be inflicted on a population because that harm is from God and can't be questioned.
And what were those harms specifically? Do you mind reiterating it?
Yeah, so if we look at the Catholic Church's checkered past on something like slavery, which up until the mid 1800s were having papal instructions on how to buy and own other human beings. When it comes to how we look at something like contraception, even life-saving ones that the Catholic Church actively works against. When we talk about individuals who experience the same-sex attraction in the life of mandatory celibacy or lavender marriages that they are forced to endure, we know that produces negative outcomes. Or in, let's say, a medieval context, when it comes to these ideas of asceticism and penance seem to inflict grave harm, but are nonetheless meritorious in the divine economy. There's a whole number of issues that I don't think are inherent to religion itself, but that I would be deeply uncomfortable with, we'll say, coming back if we had a Catholic governing system.
Okay, so just I guess this is more of a question for Brady because you probably have the topic pulled up. Is the topic, should we have a Catholic nation or a Catholic governing system, or is religion beneficial to society versus one without religion?
It's the latter.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, so Kate, I totally hear where you're coming from. And again, I don't really know I don't know if we could come to a common ground, right? If you believe homosexuality is perfectly okay, and as a Catholic, I don't believe it is. Of course, I see from your perspective, if it were no issue at all, then you could see the church as some sort of oppressive force when it comes to if we had a Catholic society or a Catholic nation preventing gay people from being married or having children, or like you said, people using contraception and whatnot. I guess I would just say back to the topic at hand. I think the Catholic Church is the most charitable organization in the entire world by nearly every single metric. And Christians in general tend to be the most charitable overall. I mean, it's without a doubt. And I think besides its charity, religion gives people a very firm, I guess, like moral code, moral law. And I know it's just Catholicism here, right? And Catholicism is pretty structured, right? And I think that introduces a good sense of discipline with people. I'm not actually used to arguing for the secular benefits of religion for people, right? I typically talk about whether Catholicism is true or not, but I think from a secular standpoint, I think everyone could see how Christianity has benefited society. And like I said earlier, and I know I think Brady disagreed with me here. I know this is not the topic, but my claim earlier was that Christianity essentially built the West, and I do believe that the kind of sacrificial love and love being willing the good of another stems from the Christian faith. And of course we will probably disagree there, but I don't see how I think of a society without Christianity. We can even look at some countries that are Islamic countries over in the Middle East, and the way they treat women and whatnot. And of course, I'm not saying every Christian treats women the way they should, but I don't think you could argue that, especially when it comes to the treatment of women, Catholicism, in its faith, in its actual doctrine, I believe is what upholds women the best. I just think if we're going to get back to really the topic on hand, I don't think you could argue that Catholicism from a secular standpoint has tremendously harmed society. I would say it actually has more positive than negative.
I would also add on to that in terms of building the West, like he said, most famous universities such as Oxford, Cambridge, and the University of Paris were all established by Catholicism. Um, and as well as, like he said, he mentioned the part of what's it called. He mentioned the charity. It's even like I mentioned earlier. It's even proven, according to Georgetown Center of Applied Research of the Apostolate, Catholic churches are the largest non-governmental provider of education, healthcare, and poverty relief worldwide. It actually goes along with it created not modern healthcare, but it has created the modern university system as well as maybe not, but it also included one of almost it had a monopoly at one point on the hospital system, at least in the Western civilization. And you can even see this in like pre 1700s America, where the churches were still a part of the hospitals.
Yeah, I mean, we see a number of good things come out of a religion. The question is, does it have a monopoly that we must maintain that religion so as to maintain these perceived goods? And we would expect essentially the largest religion on planet Earth to have the most charitable givings, but we see a group like the Mormons have a much higher per capita charity rate. And they have larger financial stores that they do humanitarian projects, not by volume, but per the population. Questions around the university system is great. There are many great things to come out of scholasticism, including the university system. But the question becomes, is what makes them great now an adherence to dogma, or is what makes them great now something that actually traditional Catholics eschew, which is to look at the Jesuit universities and go, these are the Jesuits. They're so heretical. They're part of the Father James Martin crowd in the church. That what we love about universities now is not the fact that they adhere to dogma. When it comes to other questions around something like Western civilization, that it sure seems like everything that we love about Western governance and society sure correlates quite quickly with what the Enlightenment had to say versus some previous 1700 years of thought. I don't know if we would look to Thomas Aquinas as the supreme arbiter of what makes Western society great. I don't think if we look at something like the Magna Carta, isn't something that like Catholics had a monopoly on by any stance. And so I think we would expect religion as a natural pro-social phenomena to have good things come out of it. The question is, must we maintain that? And as we've seen in many European countries, the answer is no. That though Catholics in America may give more than non-religious people, the question is, can a government provide universal health care to citizens to have good things in society without basing that in religion? And the answer seems to be no, that religion doesn't have a monopoly on these things per se. Though it has generated some, the question is it inherent or exclusive to religion as an endeavor, specifically under the Catholic flag?
Would y'all rather live in Paris or Warsaw?
Right now,
Yeah.
I have no clue. I'm much more familiar with Paris than I am Warsaw, so I'd probably lean towards that.
So I would say I would rather live in Warsaw. The reason is for Paris. I don't know how much in terms of international like studies you know, but Paris is one of probably the worst countries. I mean, not countries, cities that we have currently. Between the mass migration of and the knivings, the stabbings, I just said the same thing. The knivings, the rape increase since, as well as just Paris in general. Like as soon as it went from a religious country to a non-religious country, you had the Reign of Terror, which killed more people than the famine ever did when it was a religious country. As well as we look at just Paris right now and how it acts. Paris, nobody wants to live in France. France is a joke. It hasn't been a serious country since I would say Napoleon's time, if not like maybe a couple years after. But
No
even as we look
Robespierre
at
for
now,
you?
people would rather live in Warsaw, Poland, because Warsaw, Poland is a serious country that protects its citizens, and it's a Catholic country that has, I don't know if you know this, Jesus Christ is considered the king, and in Poland.
Yeah, they're also stripping away human rights and gay marriage. The local bishop calls it the rainbow plague, is how he talks about LGBT issues. No, I'd rather live in a country in which I have due process than Warsaw for the aesthetic of being able to say it's Christ pilled.
I actually, what exactly are you referring to in terms of Poland taking away human rights?
Do we see in a Polish context or a Parisian context who is guaranteed more due process? Open-ended question. A citizen of Warsaw or a citizen of Paris? I would prefer to live in somewhere like Paris. In my own impression of the world that's out there, I would prefer lower hate crimes. I would prefer more respect for something like due process, which we get from the Enlightenment. And I'd also love to get married and to have a family one day, and to live a happy, healthy life free from hate crimes. And so I'd probably lean towards Paris.
Hey, Brady, we're still on air, are we? Because on your screen I see.
No, I'm
Yeah.
pulling up an article here. I hope you don't mind. I'm obscuring you all for just
No,
a
no,
second.
no, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me.
I
was
hope you don't
just
mind if
curious,
Yeah. I'm just reading. This is something I found of interest here. This is from Amnesty International, Poland 2024. The new government passed legislation further endangering the rights of refugees and migrants at the Polish-Belarusian border. Reproductive rights, in particular, greater access to abortion and the decriminalization of aiding an abortion, remained a topic of political debate, but there were no changes to the law. Okay, interesting. LGBTI people continue to face discrimination. The European Court of Human Rights found Poland had violated the right to privacy in its use of Pegasus spyware. The Supreme Court upheld the acquittal of 3 activists charged with offending religious beliefs. Oh, interesting. Okay. I was just trying to see the truthiness of all this. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I don't agree with any abortion at any stance. So that doesn't really apply. I don't really see that as a bad thing. It seems there's no reason for abortion, so that doesn't really affect too much. If you want to say the legal process of migrants coming from Belarus, they don't allow migrants in the first place. I mean, I don't think that you are required as a country to allow migrants. It's not just an economic square. It's a it's a place of culture, and it doesn't matter whether or not you allow people in. Obviously, should we allow refugees in? Yes, sure, but should they come legally? Of course. We shouldn't just let whoever we want in just for the sake of, oh, they might be in danger. That's not how you run a country. You see issues with Germany, France, London, where people are, or Spain. I know somebody in Spain and London where they said they don't feel safe going out at night because people are stealing, knifing, and raping people at higher per capita rates, just higher rates in general than they were prior to all this immigration. But we can get back on the topic in terms of whether a Christian nation is better than a non-Christian nation. And I would still say that a Christian nation allows a safer, for one, it's more unifying because you have a national religion and a national cohesive, something to unify under. Saying just, oh, I'm American, that's what we're unifying under. What do you like? What exactly? Everyone lives in a country. That's not necessarily a unifying factor. But that's off topic. We can see that in a Christian country, people are typically happier, as I mentioned earlier with the Pew Research. People are more
That's not what the
unified,
Pew
as I
says,
mentioned
though.
before.
The Pew isn't comparing. If we look at the World Happiness Index, is a different question than what does Pew say about people in America. Those are 2 different questions. Because even the Pew Research shows that the maximum happiness on the self-reported scale among countries that they surveyed is that regular religious attendance is happier than non-regular attendance, but always attending is actually a step down. But it's a Pew Research study on a country, I assume in an American context. But if we compare country to country, that's a very different data set than what Pew has to say.
Well, yeah, but I would say we have to keep constant. If we're going just America and America, then I would think that it's kind of valid to obviously, like, I feel like it's pretty fair to understand that if we're going to have, we can't judge how America, as somebody who goes to church in America has the same happiness as someone who goes to church in Nigeria. I feel those are 2 completely different circumstances.
But we see non-religious societies, especially in Western contexts, are often happier than more religious countries, which isn't to say that it's the lack of religion that makes people happy, but that religion does not have a exclusive monopoly on happiness when it comes to a societal or an individual level.
It can absolutely be a factor, absolutely. Like, obviously, you might be happy with your religion. I am equally as happy without it. That was actually, I opened my notepad to write this down, and I literally put in verbatim, what about those of us that have good moral practices without religion? Like, I think I'm a pretty all right guy. My partner to be soon, I don't know if he's watching, would agree with that. So, like, it's not always so white and black. Like, religion can obviously make you a better person. It can influence you to be a better person. No one's denying that. It's great. In fact, I don't need to assign myself the label of Christian / Catholic / whatever. I will admit, I took a lot of the things that it said in the Bible, like, I don't know, 10 Commandments, and I live by that every day. I don't cheat. I'm loyal as fuck. Like, not like I'm putting that out there, like, fucking hit on me. Not like that. But, like, you know what I mean, right? Like, I don't kill people. I don't cheat. No adultery. I treat others the way I want to be treated. I can't be pressed to name the 10 Commandments right now. I haven't. It's been, like, since elementary school. But, like, I don't think it takes a label or to be ascribed to a religion to ascribe yourself to good moral beliefs or to be a good person, to be selfless, to help others in your community. It can influence you to help. I just don't think it's a requirement as much as people seem to think it is.
Sort of a question becomes, is there anything that religion has an exclusive claim to? Because I think everything that we see about religion is a natural phenomena. And so if we talk about pro-social behavior, showing up on a weekend to the same social community is going to have somebody be more social and therefore more happy. And so religion by proxy can mean other pro-social behaviors. But I'm not aware of anything that religion has an exclusive claim to that can't be either explained by or replaced by natural ends.
Yeah, no, and I completely understand all your guys' perspective. Before I had a counter question to that, but while you guys were talking, I wanted to pull up some statistics specifically about the Catholic Church and what they do worldwide. You know, what they provide. So, the Catholic Church, and I could give sources after this if you want. They educate over 200 million children every single year. They run the largest private education system in the entire world. They run over 5,000 hospitals worldwide. They provide healthcare to 1 in 4 people globally. In the U.S. alone, it serves 25 million people through social services and feeds tens of millions of people yearly. If the Catholic Church were to be void, if it were to no longer exist, 1 in 7 people in the world would lose access to healthcare. You know, when I read stuff like this, and again, like I said, this is not the typical type of arguments I make for the church, right? I would love to talk about whether Catholicism is true or not, but when I see stats like that, even from your guys' perspective, if some of the beliefs and the dogmas of the church are oppressive, or people who are part of the church acquire some sort of sense of oppression towards certain people, like the LGBTQ community or whatnot, couldn't you say that overall, if we're comparing pros and cons, the benefits and the negatives, they do have a much larger positive contribution to the world than a negative contribution?
We also have $3 billion of sex abuse settlements. The question isn't, does the church do good? The question is, must we maintain the church in order to do that good? If we bring up the example of healthcare, we say that's something that a number of societies provide, independent of being Catholic. Or we talk about resettling refugees. I mean, who's funding the USCCB, which is where I'm like, the right wing always likes to talk about, is like that's coming from the U.S. government. When it comes to feeding people globally, I mean, we have the whole controversy with USAID, where like we do have these social programs that are out there. So are there many, many, many good things that the Catholic Church does? Absolutely. The question is the only way to have those things by maintaining the church and its dogmas that also have bad things that come from them? I don't think this is a sort of binary option. I'd love in a very Hannah Montana way, I'd like the best of both worlds in this situation, which seems incredibly tenable, as we've seen in other Western countries.
Yeah, so I get that, but I guess my question still is, I still see this as a net positive. I feel like even if I were to adopt a perspective that you guys hold, I don't see how this would be a net negative, right? Like my question is, do all the charitable things, a lot of the the healthcare that they provide, like I said, if statistically speaking, if the church no longer existed, 1 in 7 people would lose access to healthcare. That's globally, that's a lot of people. And over 250,000 children across the globe would no longer have that private education. They are the largest. They make up, I think it's 28% of the healthcare in India. The Catholic Church does. So my question is, like, I know you said they do a lot of good things. If the topic at hand is is it beneficial for society? The way I see this is we would weigh the pros and cons. And a lot of the cons I heard, and maybe it's my Catholic bias, I don't see them as huge of a con, right? As you might. My question still at hand is, I know you're saying it's a lot of good things. Would you be able to recognize that if the church no longer existed? Because that's, maybe I'm seeing the question differently, but the way I see this topic is, if we're saying, is religion, specifically Catholicism or the Catholic Church, good for society or better for society rather than if the church did not exist within society? I would say, even if you took a secular perspective, 100% yes, with everything they do across the world. I know you mentioned the sex abuse scandals. Statistically, of course, I disown all of that. That's purely evil. That's disgusting. And I'd also like to add that due to, like, per capita, due to the size of the church, it actually has one of the lowest rates of abuse compared to any other organized institution across the globe.
So on the abuse crisis, Catholics like to paint it that this isn't an ongoing thing. That's seriously, like, I think of my home diocese of the Archdiocese of St. Paul in Minneapolis, where the only reason that we had reform on these issues is because the local prosecutor said, look, pal, we're going to sue your socks off unless you actually implement common safeguards to protect children. Same thing in Denver here. My former pastor is now in federal prison. And it wasn't that, I mean, obviously he did something that's bad, but it's the fact that he was in a community that saw him as incapable of doing bad because he seemed holy, that they fundraised $150 grand for him. But the problem with the church's abuse crisis is, A, there's the abuse, but as you pointed out, that happens in a number of institutions. The question becomes, it's the response that in a public school setting, those teachers get fired, they go to jail, and don't have their jobs. In a Catholic setting, before many of these reforms, and even still to this current day, what happens is, after something bad has happened, it's silenced, the priests are shuffled around, and the abuse isn't able to continue because we know abuse will happen. So the question becomes, how do we get to it, or how do we counteract that? And Catholicism is not more poised to do that. On the question of like healthcare and overall, if our only two options was either the Catholic Church's charity or no charity, I would fully be on your side, which is like, I would love charity. Or like, we want people to have healthcare, we want people to be able to eat, we want people to be able to feel safe. And so if we had a binary option, which is church or no church, and the no church option, there was nothing to replace it with, the answer is I would prefer the church. But that's not the only two options on the table, because we see in a Western context, we see countries that are able to provide more than an American system and provide a better quality of life and more charity to people from a governmental perspective. So it doesn't seem like the church essentially has a monopoly on charitable giving, even if it does provide a lot of charitable giving. And if our only metric is charitable giving, then we'd actually want to side with the Mormon church versus the Catholic Church when it comes to total net contributions per capita, essentially.
Could you restate your first claim whenever you were responding to Ben? I believe it was about the. Yeah. Sorry. So in terms of what the school would do to fire, that's not necessarily true. There's a lot of cases that I even know in my personal experience where coaches have gotten in trouble for I'm trying to say this without getting somebody banned, for grooming one of their students, but they didn't get fired of it because it wasn't made public. It was put under the rug for 4 years, and it wasn't until it was made public by somebody who wasn't even a part of it that then they did something. And that's the exact same way with the church. It's not a problem, and that's the same with a lot of things. A lot of things, they'll put it under the rug until it's made public. And the church didn't, it's not like the church didn't do anything about it. A lot of cases, they did move them to these remote areas where they weren't near anybody. They made them become monks. They made them become, they had the tiny chapel where it was only them and a couple priests. It doesn't immediately mean that just because in some certain circumstances that they didn't remove them, that because of that means that all of them are the same way. They're not. And that's the same thing with teaching. You're more likely to get, I would say, in that circumstance, you'd be more likely to have that happen to them than to have in a teaching circumstance than you would a Catholic Church circumstance. But as well as, we'll talk about the second part, which is yes, in terms of a binary, I'm sure everyone would agree that it's better to have the church than not the church. We're asking, is it better to have a religious society versus a non-religious society? And we just don't see that. We just don't see that a non-religious society does as much charity as a religious society does. We don't see that a non-religious society has as much unity as a non society does. You would see Poland, for an example. I'll use Poland again. They have strong national unity compared to America, where we don't have strong national unity. We're a secular state. We don't have a national religion, while Poland does. Or you can see in another stance where Hungary does. Hungary's it has a strong natural religion, but we don't have the same case for the US.
Yeah, so on the abuse crisis, statistically speaking, this is simply not the case. That all of the stats about how you're more likely to be harmed in a school than in a Catholic church, when we look at the numbers, the answer is no, and we can't extrapolate. The bigger question here is on every archdiocese that has gone bankrupt over these issues. On the websites where it goes, your first call should always be to the police over the abuse crisis, not to the church. That the Catholic Church's response to abuse is abhorrent. It is terrible. It has enabled tremendous amounts of harm to keep going precisely because of the Catholic framework that has been imposed on top of it. That the reforms that the church has thankfully made, whether we're looking at major U.S. dioceses in particular, the reform that has been made is not by somebody praying. The reform that has been made is by the local prosecutor holding the feet of the diocese to the fire to enact common sense things that schools already do, where we have mandatory reporters, where when these cases come up, they're not handled internally, that the police are automatically involved. That we have this whole process instead of shuffling them to the next parish. And no, the Catholic Church did not just send abusive priests off to the boondocks away from kids. In fact, oftentimes these priests were sent to parish upon parish upon parish, and every time this happened, they got sent to a new one. The secular public schools have a arguably better response to this than to the Catholic Church in an American context that has enabled this to happen. But the question on a larger scale, or to go to your second point, is national unity cool? Yeah. Ought national unity cause us to deny people basic human rights? Are we that hung up on the idea of paying lip service to unity that we're okay with throwing people under the bus?
When we're
I'd
talking
much
about
rather
human rights, we're just talking about unity right now in terms of Christianity and versus non-Christianity. I don't think
yeah,
I don't think someone has a human right to go to whatever country they want to, just for the fact of them trying to be a refugee. You still have to follow a legal process. And you don't have a right to any country you go to, other than the
I'm
one
not sure
that
that
you
I brought
currently
that
live
up.
in. Well, that's what we're referring to. You said you would perfect. We're talking about unity, and then you're referring to uh, not having basic human rights. So, and that's what our
Yeah,
point. That's what we were talking about earlier.
when I talk about human rights, I'm talking about, let's say, in a Scandinavian context in which people are guaranteed healthcare, that people are guaranteed due process, that people are guaranteed to live lives free of discrimination, that people are able to build lives without sort of these without national unity being a dog whistle to destroy. Is national unity cool? Yeah, but if it's at the expense of something else, like I'd much rather be in a Scandinavian country than some based in Christ-pilled like Eastern European country.
And nationalism is very closely tied to religion and identity as such. Like in America, I think of what does nationalistic America encompass? A big part of that is like conservative Christian values. It's like we have this whole thing where it's like, at least I would advocate for the separation of church and state. I do not, and I don't know who said the idea of having a national religion. I do not like the idea of a national religion. I like the idea of religion, but a national religion kind of implies that there is one right answer and the rest of them are like, it's like, we're going to push you towards this one, right? I don't like the implication of that.
Well, I would just disagree. But Ben had his hand up, so.
Yeah, Kate, I have a question for you, man. So, you said statistically speaking, it's actually false that a child is more likely to be abused in the public schooling system than the church. What was your statistics, or what was the study that you pulled up for that? Because while we were talking about it, I pulled up one of the most famous ones on this issue is the John Jay report from the years 1950 to 2006, and it found that a little less than 4% of Catholic clergy had faced allegations of sexual abuse, whereas in the public schooling system, 9.6% of all children have reported some sort of sexual abuse from an educator. So I just wanted to know from what, because I don't, maybe I misheard you, but I feel like you told Logan that earlier that statistic was false.
Yeah, so there's sort of this is a reply to a reply of a claim. Where in many sermons, if we look at somebody like Father Daniel Nolan, who's a fraternity priest, has this long-winded sermon about how a child is more safe in a Catholic church than in a public school. The idea of self-reporting isn't actually the metric that we need to look at, because in a Catholic context, not necessarily Catholicism inherently, but the question is when we look at the rate of abusive priests, when it comes to the severity of their abuse, and when it comes to the duration of which they are enabled in active ministry, we see by those metrics they are not better than public schools. I wouldn't paint this caricature that Catholic churches are these crazy, abusive, never send your kids to them. But the reply about the abuse crisis, if we only look at self-reporting, isn't the metric that we need to be looking at, because that is sort of part of a cover-up, is that we don't know those statistics. I would make
that.
But I would also ask, I mean, you said that the rate is higher among the clergy. I was just curious, where did you get those statistics from? If we can't trust the John Jay report, what would we trust to prove that it's actually less safe in a Catholic church for a child than it is in the public schooling system?
Yeah, so schooling system is also kind of worse because you're with them every day, while compared to a priest, you're not going to be with them like on a day-to-day basis. But sorry, you can. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Yeah, no. So it's not that the John Jay report needs to be thrown out of the window. The question is when we look at something like the Pennsylvania grand jury reports, or we look at the Ramsey County documents about the Archdiocese of St. Paul and Minneapolis, or we look at even a conservative Catholic reporting like Church Militant on the SSPX. The question is, does a dogmatic Catholic framework allow for slower or quicker responses to abuse that is going to happen? That we know the rate of priests that are, how do we not get banned here, inclined to do bad things to children isn't like some crazy difference between the outside world. Or if you look at the actual rate of things happening, it's not that the Catholic Church is through the roof. The question is when we look at these multi-year investigations across the Catholic Church, that we do see that the Catholic Church is often very ill-posed in any American diocese to respond prior to a lot of this Boston Globe reporting. Thankfully, since then, we've had a ton of amazing reform. And I wouldn't say that there's something inherently evil about Catholicism, but that if we make the historical case about what is the core of the abuse crisis, it's not simply the rate. It's the fact that the church did nothing to protect these kids.
Okay, so even if I were to grant, right, and I think everyone here could, is that the way the church responded was horribly, because there was really no response at all for a while, and a lot of cardinals were covering things up. You still made a claim that the rate was higher, and I just want to know what rate that is and where did you get that from?
No, I'm not saying that the rate overall when it comes to self-reporting is higher. I'm saying that the claim that Catholics make, that you are much safer in a public school than you are in a Catholic church, is not something that is statistically based and well backed. So I'm essentially making a reply preemptively to a Catholic reply, not a first principles approach to the question. Because to your point, we don't see on any sort of long scale longitudinal study that religion inherently causes higher rates. The question is, historically, have these religious communities acted in a more expeditious and safe manner than their secular counterparts for a given decade?
Okay, so you were not claiming that the statistics show that it's, statistically you're much higher at risk to be abused by a priest than you were if you were in the public school system. Because like I mentioned, the statistics is actually half of what the public school was. Your point was that due to their lack of reporting, that causes this this lack of safety for a child, because we see historically what the church did to cover it up.
Yeah, correct.
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, and even if I granted that, I don't think that's inherent to Catholicism as in the religion. Like I don't think that's inherent to what the religion is based off of or what it preaches. I think that's because we have a lot of bad priests. We have a lot of priests who have desires that they are not able to control. They don't have any sort of temperance when it comes to that. and they're evil and they decide to prey on children, the most vulnerable people that are in society, right? So I think I could grant that. I don't think I would be on here and try to defend what happened with the church abuse
Yeah.
scandals.
Because I wouldn't argue that it's inherent, in the same way that I wouldn't argue that the pros of Catholicism are inherent or exclusive to it. I think that every social institution that we're going to look at is going to have those pros and the cons. In that I don't think that the Catholic Church has the highest ratio of good to bad. I think there are many good things that the church does. There's also many failures out there. So at the end of the day, we must make a decision how we want to move together as a society in a, for lack of a better term, non-binary decision-making process. Not to throw non-binary people under the bus, but in this context of it's not the church or no church, that there's a number of degrees between. And I say that nothing is technically like inherent to a belief system. We can make the case of like what can we reasonably expect to happen from a current social institution. But to your point, these things aren't inherent per se to a set of beliefs.
Yeah, no, and I think I could grant that charity itself is not inherent only to the Catholic Church. There are charitable people, of course, outside. Like you brought up Mormons, and I was aware of that statistic before this debate. But what I would say with Catholicism, I mean, almsgiving, giving to the poor, being charitable, I mean, that is pretty much mandated. Like you have to be a charitable person, you have to be a generous person. And with all the statistics I brought up earlier of the massive benefits the church brings fiscally and with healthcare and everything to society, I think if the church were no longer there, and I know you said it's not this binary system, it's not this black and white cut and dry option of church or no church, but I would say if the topic at hand is whether Catholicism is beneficial to society versus, I guess, the society without Catholicism, I'd say the moment you strip the church out of society, sure, parents may feel a little safer with their children going to church, not with a priest who's been historically known to cover up some sex abuse scandals. Like, yeah, I could grant that. But if they are so high on almsgiving and the healthcare, providing 28% of healthcare to India, these kinds of things, if you strip the church out of society, sure, other people, the governments might be able to take over and fill that gap, that lack of donations and fundraising and healthcare. But it is inherent to Catholic moral teaching to be charitable and to give alms to the poor.
Yeah, and I would also add in that just because I would also add in, like, in terms of education, you're more likely to have a better education. You're more likely to be more not intellectual, but you're more likely to do better in your education if you do go to a Catholic school compared to one that's a non-religious school, like a public school or some other kind of smaller private school. And like you can even see this in like terms of our public school versus another country's public school, like such as Italy, Poland. You can use Switzerland as also, or Austria. These people where they have religion incorporated within their schooling. It's the exact, you can see a step up compared to what we have in America, which I think the Catholic Church will show that it is a better institution in terms of governing as well. Well, that's not really our conversation, but more it's a better institution of society than just leaving it up to us as a people.
I mean, the question then becomes like, would we rather have Catholic charities in the U.S. is like basic healthcare, or would we rather have a Scandinavian healthcare system? It's like, oh, I'd probably rather live in a country with universal healthcare. Or when it comes to our education, yeah, I think
the Catholic Church isn't against universal healthcare. It's actually it's one of the people who are pushing the most for more universalized healthcare. Whether or not I agree with it, that's not my point. My point is that's what the Catholic Church is pushing for in the USCBB. I don't know the acronym.
USCCB. I mean, we can't say that the USCCB is the leading pioneer when it comes to universal healthcare, because in countries in which they made a decision for universal healthcare that came from non-Catholics, we can't say that it's Catholics that led that charge. Or when it comes to the schooling system, right? Not to keep quoting the Bible of Scandinavia, but like I would rather take a Scandinavian public school than a local Catholic school. But you point out something which is like where I grew up, that where the Catholic schools, like I went to a Catholic elementary school, which was better than the local public elementary school. And then as I got to high school, then actually the public school outperformed the local Catholic schools. So I don't think that any of these things are inherent. Um, and I think in many situations they can be better, right? If you have a private school with more funding, with better teachers, like you're going to expect more educational outcomes. Um, but the question is that our only way to a better future, or do we have a more reliable way to a better future with Catholicism? And the answer that we've seen across countries is not necessarily.
I mean, we do, okay, in terms of just education, we do see that Catholic schools, on average, per capita, outperform public schools in terms of standardized tests. Um,
And who set
and
that system up, right? Like, you have to ask, why is that a thing? It's not that the schools are exactly similar and one just prays more. The question is, why do we see those differences? And whatever that difference is, can we get to that same good outcome without without religion? And the answer is yes.
I think part of the problem, if you don't mind me interjecting here, and I could be on a trail to nothing here because I don't live in the United States, and this is not an issue that happens in Canada, because in Canada, you'll find that public and Catholic schools are quite similar in terms of like the funding they get from the province, because in Canada, provinces handle education. In America, I know I have no idea who handles funding for public schools, but I know they get shit.
State.
Like
So
they
same thing,
literally get
basically.
nothing. What's that, sorry?
It's basically the same thing. It's like the state.
Okay. But you notice, right? Especially I'll point out in a lot of lower income areas, those schools get the shit end of the stick and then they close. And then I don't know, especially Trump. I remember at one point he said, and I hate talking about Trump, like as a Canadian, I'm not like that, not part of the discussion, but like he said at one point, I love charter schools. I wish I could tell you a charter school is someone. Please fill me in on this because we don't have this concept of a charter school in Canada. Is it like a privately owned school?
Okay, first I would talk about the lower income. Actually, and specifically Texas, we push more money into lower income, and it's more, I guess, probably a corruption thing than anything. But they don't typically do better on standardized tests, no matter how much money you pump in. But in terms of the charter school, it's a private. I believe it is private, but it's secular. It's not Christian at all. It has no kind of religious
Okay,
affiliation. At least in
I
my
follow.
state, it doesn't.
I follow.
So with school funding in the US, you have the local, the state, and the federal money that goes into the education system. In many either voucher systems or charter systems, depending on the state, right? If you have school choice, is that let's say each pupil is allocated $8,000 in the local public school. If you're a parent, you can say, I actually want my child to go to a charter or to a private school, and that $8,000 follows them from the public school to the private institution that they're going to. And we do see oftentimes that private and charter schools have better outcomes, which often comes down to a funding issue. And when we talk about like inner city schools, when we do a cross comparison of per pupil spending, that's not the right metric to look at. The question is, in a particular school district, does more funding raise those test scores? Not to the equivalent of the suburbs, but from the baseline. Education is a very tricky thing to measure. But when we look at the stats, it turns out funding does work. But it's a whole other rabbit hole.
Well, I would
Brady,
argue because at least in Houston, Texas, we have a school called Strict Jesuit. Love the school. It's
not the
we have
Jesuits.
I don't have a beef with Jesuits.
No, I know way too many people that do. I have to
I
throw in
mean,
the
I
obligatory
don't.
Jesuit
There's
joke.
faithful Jesuits and there's non-faithful Jesuits. It's not like all Jesuits are bad. There's some Franciscans that I don't prefer, but that's besides the point. I'm off topic. It's not a theology thing. It's more of a personal thing. They're just some of them are just disrespectful. Anyways, um, Houston, Sugarland. Sugarland High School is completely fine. They get relatively the exact same funding. It's in the suburbs. And then you see Strict Jesuit, they get, I mean, in terms of the cost of it, it's not that much different from how much the taxes are going into Sugarland High School, which is a predominantly pretty expensive neighborhood to live in. And then the private school, I mean, it's relatively the same kind of income. And you don't see that, but you see more money being pushed into the inner city, which granted they have gotten a little bit better in terms of quality, but they haven't really gotten that much better with the amount of money we put in, which is majority of the money. Well, then my high school, which was in the suburbs, we really didn't get that much money from the public school. Like obviously we got it from standardized testing and from the federal government because we had to. That's completely off topic. But we still didn't get all the nice things that the smaller, not the smaller, that the I would say the less income schools got. They had a lot nicer stuff than us. They had a lot better like opportunities than we had in some cases where we got less funding, but we were considered a more income area, which even then that's like it's like middle class, like lower middle class.
I
So
think the
that's cool.
question then is like, where is the money going? Is it going to the right places? And I couldn't even begin to tell you the intricacies of that because I have no idea. But like, if they're getting money, the question is, how much money are they getting? Is it really enough? Because at face value, like you said, they're getting a lot of money. And
Well, I
whether
mean,
that's
inside the
true or
school.
not.
So
Okay,
it's
yeah.
going towards the resources, and their teachers actually get paid more than like the teachers in like my area would.
Okay, fair. But like, I don't know, consider like, hey, maybe these students need a little mental health support. Maybe these students need, like, yeah, the teachers are getting paid more, but maybe there's not enough, like, I don't know, extracurriculars. There's special needs that you need in these schools, like especially where people are underperforming in these areas where like some people are going to need an extra help. They're like money to go to breakfast clubs, money to go to paying for kids' lunches. I mean, kind of anecdote.
Well, in Texas, you get free breakfast and free lunch with a lot of the if you it's literally just a form you sign. There's not
Oh.
really any proof of your income. So,
Okay.
The question here is that education incredibly complex, and we don't see a clear solution that is the Catholic Church is better or exclusive at becoming better than these other incomes, right? We're sort of getting bogged down in the weeds here, which is sort of proof that it's not inherent to Catholicism, that there are solutions apart from reaffirming the Nicene Creed that works in the educational system. If we have a much longer discussion comparing it country to country or state to state or district to district, right? If this sort of only options are perfect Catholic schools in which all of the families come from a two-parent household and they're better than these inner city schools, right? Like we're now comparing apples to oranges and have lost the thread of if religion provides a more stable and more exclusive way to a better future. Because we're both admitting that there's goods for religion. The question is the only way to those goods through religion exclusively?
Also, just want to point out the timer's at about 4 minutes because it's almost 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We've been going for 2.5 hours. So final points, and then we will send it off.
We got to hear from Ben. We haven't heard from Ben here
Yes.
in a while.
Yeah, well, I guess I'll make a very, very short response to that point you made, Cade. And then maybe should we just do like a quick little closing statement or something to wrap it up?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
I think that's
if you
fine.
do closing statement, me, and then Logan, and then since it's Brady's stream, we can give Brady the last word here.
Absolutely.
give
He
a
paid me
little
$10
yeah.
to say that.
Yeah, so I would not. I think I'd be a fool to deny the fact that a lot of the things, all the good things all the good things that could be viewed from a secular perspective that the Catholic Church brings to society are also brought from things outside of the church. I would not deny that, but I would say the large majority of those things were brought initially from the church, and I think that is a reflection of the inherent virtue that it instills in people. And I know, at the end of the day, we're going to have disagreements when it comes to Catholic social teaching and moral teachings when it comes to like homosexuality, contraception, these kinds of moral issues. Because, of course, to me and Logan, we don't see them as a, if the church teaches X is wrong, but you believe X is fine, you may see that as an oppressive belief. And having the church exist within society, having this Christian religion exist within society, breeding people or teaching people that these things are wrong is oppressive, or it does not lead to better outcomes. I would disagree, of course, from my Catholic perspective. And I think since we're wrapping it up, I don't really want to go into a whole discussion on, like why I believe Catholicism is true, because that's not even the debate. But I guess to wrap it up, like a final statement is I'd say, I still believe, even from the statistics I provided earlier, that the Catholic Church is a force for good within the world. And I'd say it has, even if I were to take on a secular perspective, it has more pros than cons. And because of that, I do believe that it still needs to exist within society. And like I said, I'm not going to be advocating for some sort of like Catholic nationalism right now because that's not the debate either. But yeah, I guess that's how I'd wrap it up. And I really appreciate you guys being super charitable, and I loved having this discussion.
Yeah, and thank you so much for voicing your opinion. You know what? And it's totally understandable. Like, obviously, we disagree on a lot of things, but I gotta say, I value the shit out of having discussions that are actually a little fucking productive. And it's like, it's not a screaming match, because obviously we don't agree on things. That's like how the world works. There's some like fucking 8 billion of us on this fucking earth. Like, it's gonna happen. I'm just happy that we all had the chance to like kind of weigh our differences in a way. It's like we can almost come to a compromise on some things. I know there's some things we touched on that like perhaps there's room for another debate about some topics, but like I don't know, maybe in future. But talking about these two things, I feel like there's definitely a lot more common ground on some things than like even than I thought before, you know. But sorry, Kay, go ahead.
Let's see. What do I want to say for closing statements? I think when I was becoming very Catholic, what I saw in the world was problems, broken families, substance abuse, unhappiness, um, economic injustice, all of these terms. And I think what the Catholic Church provided me is a framework to have a better world. That I saw if we adhere to Catholicism, as I came increasingly devout, wanting to give my entire life to the church, that I saw so much good in what the church had to say. This sort of panacea, not that it would fix everything, but it would make the world a better place. And what I found since after that, in going to very religious spaces, is that they're dealing with the same thing that the rest of the world's dealing with, is how do we care for our fellow man? I don't think that religion is a bad impulse. I don't think that it's anything inherently wrong. But I think ultimately what both the religious and the non-religious person is going after is how do I make a better world and how do I care for my fellow man? And I think when we can engage in that reality, whether it involves at times using religious charities or non-religious charities, or governmental action or private action, I think we're all on the same page that we want the world to be a better place. And I think that outside of dogma, we are poised in the best possible position to engage with the world as it is because we don't have these same preconceived notions about the world. That I see so much of the progress that we've made in society whenever we talk about something like the Enlightenment or the rise of the American Constitution, all these things that we love so much, that though often the people who brought these documents to us may have been described as religious, they were not as religious as previous eras. And so I don't think religion is inherently good or bad. I think it's a tool. And I think if we can use it as a tool to help us, it is awesome. I think if we use it as a tool and then lock it in a cage in a way that actually actively harms people, then we have betrayed the basic principle of religion in of itself, just to care for our fellow man. That's my soapbox. There's like 8 other points, but we'll hand it over to Logan.
I don't think I'm gonna make it very long. I would just say that to have I'm not like Ben said, we're not here to argue Catholic nationalism. That's not really the debate here. But to argue a national society, to argue a Catholic society is a better society, I think this is just a general truth that a organization that promotes charity, well-being, the love of your neighbor, specifically, I would say what we talked about earlier with man and a woman being married in the idea that procreating is the purpose. I would also argue, and I think Ben would too, that somebody like the Catholic Church would advocate for making it illegal for a man to leave a woman if he has impregnated her. That's pretty straightforward. I mean, like, like to leave her, I feel like that's very straightforward. But the Catholic Church just give us indispensable things that a secular society couldn't, that just wouldn't do. And you can argue that the semantics of, oh, but in theory that they can. In theory they could, yes, but that's not what we're seeing in statistics. That's not what we're seeing in the research that I provided at the beginning of this. I think that the Catholic Church has put in obviously they've obviously had their issues, not the church itself, but the people within it. Because we don't follow Judas, we follow Jesus. We're not here to follow a secular society in which we want to just basically be vaguely nice rather than actually living for virtue and actually living for our fellow people and as well as ourselves at the end of the day. So to finish it off, I would just say that the Catholic Church, I think, is just a net good. And obviously, we're not asking by binaries, but if we're talking about society, a Catholic society is going to do a million times better than a non-Catholic society, and it's just apparent in the natural international world today.
Well, I do have to say I was a little scared going into this debate because like I had mentioned, I don't know if I told you guys before, I'm not a debate bro. I don't do these kinds of streams like ever. I think I've done this one other time. And I have to say I'm very, very happy with the discussion that we had today. I'm very much open to doing this again. Like I will say I was surprised because I'm so used to getting on TikTok and everyone screaming in your face. Like, I don't know if any of you go on TikTok live. You're like sitting on the toilet or something. It's like, look what's coming up on my stream. It's just someone yelling at you, and that nothing productive ever comes out of it. So I guess my final sentiment has to be, as someone who used to be a Catholic, I have a lot of opposing views of the religion, and I am trying to work on having a more favorable outlook of people who follow the religion. I think that, like, it's okay to have disagreements, you know? And, like, obviously there's a lot of things that we don't agree on. I think, kind of in closing, like, obviously the whole thing about marriage, I still feel that marriage is not exactly something that's so black and white. But, like, also I understand that people see it differently. However, I think that it's okay to be a little more dynamic about things, you know? And on the topic about not homosexuality, about having Catholicism making, or about it making the world a bit of a better place, I fully do not. The point of having a better world because people have principles to follow is not lost on me. Don't worry. I see a lot of the good that the Catholic religion does. I also see a lot of the bad, and I also see a lot of the unresolved shit that is pushed under the rug. That's also not lost on me. And meanwhile, a lot of accusations are being made, you know? But I also try to see the other side of it. And I'm glad that I feel like we all came to the table with very valid arguments today. I want to thank all of our guests today. I want to thank Ben. I want to thank Cade, Logan, and all of you watching on the various platforms today. I think this is a very productive discussion. And all of you, if you'd like to say bye, you can do so now. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you to our debate guests and Cade for being here today. This is one of my first debates, so I hope I didn't do too shitty today. But I hope you all enjoyed this new format of stream. I don't do shit like this that often. But I don't know. Let me know if you want to see it again. So, debate panelists, say your final goodbyes now. We're going to hand it off to the black screen very soon.
I think our differences are less scary and we can actually talk about them face to face, or in this case, digitally face to face. I don't know. I generally don't like the stitch culture of TikTok because it like aggravates people. But I think in this particular format, what we've seen is that it turns out that in these difficult discussions, the answer is to talk to each other, to listen to each other, to hear people out, and see where things end up, as opposed to other things that have been done in other weeks that we may be familiar with.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree. It's worth getting into it a little bit, you know, like kind of hash it out, but without actually punching each other in the face. So with that being said,
I think we lost Ben.
What's that, sorry?
I think we lost Ben.
Oh no! Oh, did he
is
lag?
Frozen.
Uh-oh. Internet.
He said it's loading.
Uh-oh.
I guess I can give goodbyes for both of us. Oh, he just told me to say goodbye. Oh wait, he's back.
There he is.
We're back. We are
Ben,
so
you
back.
got that. Ben, it's on you.
Oh,
next.
sweet. Yeah, sorry guys. I don't know what happened there. It just froze for a minute.
All good. We got a minute left. We have a heart out, everyone. Say your goodbyes.
All right. I will be praying for y'all, regardless of whether you not want it or not. I will be praying for all of y'all. God bless and hail Christ.
Same thing. I really appreciate both you guys having us on. You know, thanks to Brady and Cade, and you know, thanks for Logan for doing this. I've known Logan for a while. Yeah, and you know, like Logan said, you know, I'll be praying not just for you guys, but for everybody. I think the whole world right now, you know, there's a lot of turmoil that's going on, especially within the United States. So yeah, I mean, again, I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward. I hope we can do a debate in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Somebody's got to end it with an Ave Christus Rex. I was expecting that from one of you two.
I already did.
Hey, Christus Rex,
I
my
said it in
friend.
English. Hail Christ.
All right, everyone, that's all the time we have for today. Again, thank you so much to our panel guests. I really, really appreciate y'all coming out on the stream today. To the people in chat, to the people on YouTube, Twitch, I think, had a problem for some reason. I don't know what the fuck happened there. Sorry about that, everyone. I will have that fixed for next time. Brady fucked up. But yeah, everyone on TikTok, everyone on YouTube, thank you so much for watching today. I hope you got a little something out of this, you know? If you like what you saw, hit me with a follow on all the platforms. They're all linked in my bio. Thank you for the donos. Thank you even if you didn't donate. Don't matter to me. I'm going to go eat something now. I hope you all have a wonderful night, and maybe we'll be back with this soon. Ciao, everyone. See y'all soon.